A meeting with NIMBYs tonight. Okay, wait a minute.
You are on.
I'm on?
Mic is on.
Okay, I'm on. Okay, welcome. I am calling to order the December 4th meeting of the Santa Monica Planning Commission. Commissioner Landers, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Put your right hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi,
Here.
Commissioner Fresco,
Here.
Commissioner Lambros,
Here.
Chair Lambert,
No,
Wait a minute.
Commissioner
I'm
Landris,
Commissioner Landris. You're
Landris.
Chair Lambert.
Yeah, I
and
think
Chair
so.
Lambert.
Yes.
Sorry.
Here. Can we have the planning director's report, please?
Yes. So can we put it up on a screen, Kyle? Yeah. Thank you. City Council or City Council will be holding their housing study session, similar to the joint session you had with the Housing Commission on December the 10th. And December 17th will be the PICO zoning changes that you saw in September. So that will close out our items for the end of the year. And then coming up in January will be the coastal zone low-cost lodging fee update at council. For Planning Commission, at the moment we have the December 11th meeting canceled. Unfortunately, we had a number of items drop off that meeting. And January 1st, being New Year's Day, hope you enjoy that. Won't drag you all out here. Our first meeting in January will be January the 15th. We have two development review permits on there. One is a mixed use, it's a creative office project. One is an affordable housing project. And we will have a CP amendment for the Santa Monica Brew Works. January 22nd will be the long-awaited mobility update on that date, and we will also be pairing that with the SB 743 vehicle miles traveled screening criteria and impact thresholds, which is something we're mandated by the state to do. Just as a special note, that second meeting in January will be our first move into the East Wing as they do renovations here in the council chamber. So that project got postponed from the end of this year into early next year.
How long is it going to be?
Kyle, how long is that going to be? 3 months?
Oh.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Are you done?
I'm done.
Oh,
Yep.
my God.
I do have a
Sean.
quick question. Thanks. There's been some talk recently of and this is related to projects coming forward. There's been some talk of a project at 2709 Santa Monica Boulevard, which is currently occupied by Rip City, but I don't see it anywhere on any of our documentation. Are you aware of any filings for that parcel? There's a petition that's been signed by something like 7,500 people now. It's going to head to Landmarks first, but I just wanted to inquire.
Has it been through demo? Yeah. What was the address again?
I think it's 2709 Santa Monica.
I will look real quick.
Fantastic. It's Rip City. The business is Rip City Skates, which is the oldest and longest continuing operating.
I don't see anything in our permit records for that address for a submittal
Okay.
of any kind.
Okay.
So
Thanks.
I have a question/comment. It's my understanding that the Housing Commission did not take any action on recommendations to send to City Council. Is that correct?
that is correct. Yeah, they actually had a number of other items on their agenda. From what we heard from housing staff, they did not have additional discussion on that item.
Okay, so I will be presenting for the Planning Commission, but it's
Mhm.
not really a joint set of recommendations because they didn't do it, right?
Correct. Yeah, you all had your comments. They all the comments that we received, they are summarized in the council report.
Cool.
But certainly, I think that you all can go speak on as the chair of the commission. You're always open to go speak at council.
Okay. Are there commissioner announcements? I hope not.
Just that I attended the CoMotion conference since our last meeting, and it was very, very useful in terms of our mobility conversations.
Cool. Okay. There are no minutes to approve. There are no statements of official action to approve. Let's keep up the momentum. We have public, we're actually going to rearrange the agenda such that 3030 Nebraska goes after the promenade presentation. So just
So
so
moved.
those of you in the audience will know that. We are going to take the resolutions before, though. So there's a consent calendar with 2 resolutions of intention on it. We have a chit for 8A, so we have to pull that. Do I have a motion to approve 8B under the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, do we need a staff report on 8A, or should we go directly to
Move
public?
to waive the staff report on 8A.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And the person who wants to speak on 8A is Daniel Guggenheim. Just identify yourself, and you have 3 minutes. No, is the mic on, Kyle? Do I have to, I don't have to do anything. It's on, okay.
There we go.
Hi, I'm Daniel Guggenheim. I reside at 2614 31st Street. Thanks for giving me a few minutes to speak. Thank you all for taking up the resolution to fix the parcel coverage for the R1, in particular for additions of a second story. I'm in the middle of a remodel that was started relatively recently. I've been tracking what's been going on with the R1 and making some plans based on it, and I just wanted to mention that the delay in implementing the 55% does have real impacts on residents, both people who have been trying to plan things and see it as a moving target, and people like myself. I have a need to do a substantial change to my plans that are going to require me to opt into the new code that's taking effect on January 1st. As a result of that, I will have to downsize my project as currently proposed because it was built to or designed to the 50%, and instead of being now at 55%, it's at 45%. And I would just like to encourage the Planning Commission to perhaps think creatively if there's ways that staff can be directed to work with homeowners like myself who are now stuck in somewhat of an interim period between January 1 being when the new code takes effect, and perhaps in the spring when the 45% becomes 55%. For example, one creative solution is I do have a permit and plans to put a second story onto my house. Perhaps that means that I have an existing 2-story structure that can take advantage of the 55%.
Not unless it's built.
Like I said,
Yeah.
I'm just encouraging the Planning Commission to try and work with residents. There are other potential workarounds, such as taking advantage of the detached and attached ADUs that are going to be permitted by right as of January 1st. Could be things like waiving permit fees for the multiple permits that I'm going to have to get to redesign my project to include an attached ADU, and then design it again to get rid of that when the parcel coverage takes effect. And so to the extent planning staff can be helpful in meeting with residents like myself and trying to take advantage of creative ways to mitigate the impacts of this unfortunate delay that arose from an error. I know that residents like myself who are trying to do remodels and trying to do what we've been encouraged to do are being prejudiced both in terms of time and significant dollars because of how this went down. So obviously the sooner it can be fixed, the better, and to the extent there can be anything done in the interim.
Well, actually, there's a potential solution if it works for you. I'm really sorry about what you're going through, by the way. I've queried staff about having a very short meeting on December 18th and doing an R1 red line for the 55% for remodels on December 18th. And, oh, that's just... Oh, he just finished. Were you finished?
No, I'm listening.
Okay. I
don't need to, and
Okay.
I wasn't sure if
So
we were going
I
to
didn't
engage
cut
in
him
it.
off. So December 18th would be a very short, like 10-minute planning commission meeting to review and hopefully approve the 55% remodel allowance. And then we would send it on to council, and they would probably take it up in January. It gives you, it's like,
That's wonderful. I know you're real people with lives, and it's the holidays, so that's
no, but I mean,
very
I
thoughtful, and
sympathize with
thank
you. The other thing for you to know, and I don't know if this, hopefully it'll be picked up in our code, is that state law now says that any ADU under 750 square feet is exempt from fees.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for
That's
mentioning
city fees. I can't speak for the school district or anybody else.
that. Understood. Thank you.
While you're up here, can I just ask a question of staff? If there are, do you have thoughts about other creative ways, recognizing that having this meeting is a burden on everybody, but would be a help to residents like Mr. Guggenheim? Are there alternatives, or is this the best path forward? What's
It's not a burden on me.
Before the planning manager answers, I do want to caution everybody that this particular issue is not before you this evening. This is limited to the ROI.
So it would be a future agenda item
It would be,
discussion.
yeah.
Okay, all right.
I'm just curious.
So but just so you will know, that's what we're going to propose.
Thank you.
Or, yeah.
That's it.
I mean, generally, we try not to convene the commission just for one item because we've heard, concerns about that in the past. But if the commission, a quorum of you were amenable to doing that, we could certainly, have that meeting because at this moment we have no other items for that. Another option is, we're not aware of, no one else has come forward with this kind of a scenario. However, given the council's direction, to bring forward a fix, we don't have, it seems like, the council is supportive of this. Certainly any homeowner who is in this situation, could prepare revisions to their plans anticipating the change, but with the knowledge that obviously the staff couldn't, sign off on a permit until the
Right.
law is actually in effect. Which again, if the commission wanted to have their meeting, it's possible. We don't have control over the council's
Right.
agenda, and so we don't know whether there's availability in January, and if there would be, obviously then it's still 30 days from second reading.
I guess my point is we're doing the best we can as a
Yeah.
planning commission, and if the council
Sure.
doesn't take it up, that's the
Right.
council.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how many people are out there actually designing 55% remodels who haven't come to us, so, it'd be good to actually get this clear once and for all. Commissioner?
Yeah, if we're going to go with this sort of, let's call it a detour, for lack of a better word, is there any reason why we wouldn't do it on the 11th? Why we wouldn't speed it up?
There's a 10-day notice for
Oh,
zoning
it's just a
ordinance
10-day.
amendments.
Okay,
yeah.
got it.
Okay. So should we adopt the ROI and move? I guess we should, huh? Is there a motion to adopt the ROI?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Were you just here for this, Ross? Oh, lucky you. Okay. So the next item on the agenda, what?
Nothing. I'm just saying we're moving on to the next item.
The next item is item 10A, update and discussion on Promenade 3.0 physical plan.
I'm sorry, did you move 8B? I'm not sure I heard.
We moved.
You did, okay.
Did the consent calendar, and then we took this.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Commissioners, good evening and happy holidays. I'm Alan Loomis, City Urban Designer and Planning Community Development, and I'm happy to give you a kind of brief update on Promenade 3.0, or lengthy, as you wish to engage in discussion. The first thing that I want to say by way of an update is that we are going to be hosting an exhibit and community open house related to Promenade 3.0, showcasing the latest designs that we presented to Council in November. That's going to be at the police department's holiday substation on the promenade itself. That's at 1431 Promenade. It's the old, I believe it's Forever 21 is the tenant that used to be in this space. The substation is now open. We're going to launch our exhibit, the Promenade 3.0 project, this Saturday. So we're going to have our project team there starting at 9 o'clock in the morning. We'll be there till about 2 in the afternoon. So we invite all members of the community to stop by, talk with us, see what we're thinking about doing, share your ideas, provide us feedback, and et cetera. That'd be a great opportunity to engage. What I have up on the screen is a kind of mock-up of what the exhibit's going to look like, so you can see the silhouette of a person, so it's pretty large. It's all 3 blocks with the 3 renderings you've produced, and then the colored rectangles are going to be, you can scale them off that person. They're roughly, 8.5 by 11 by 11 by 17, 8.5 by 14. Those are going to be illustrated call-outs for different project features. So we will have this up throughout the holiday season. So anytime the police substation is open, which is noon to 8 o'clock, members of the public who want to stop by can kind of look at it. That will have some other interactive possibilities for people to provide feedback on what they see. And then during the weekdays, Monday through Fridays, we're actually going to have staff there from 12 to noon. So we'll be holding office hours, and by staff, that's mostly going to be me. At least Monday through Thursdays, and some downtown Santa Monica staff. So there'll be an opportunity during the lunch hours for somebody to drop in and kind of get some one-on-one feedback. So we're hoping that that'll be a good opportunity for everybody to show up and provide input on where we stand with the promenade. So that's the main announcement I wanted to share with the commission. And then I also want to share with you the latest that we presented to City Council. As I mentioned earlier in November, on November 5th, we had a long study session with the City Council on Promenade 3.0. And we dived into all three of what we call the lanes of activities. So as you as the commission will recall, we've divided our work on Promenade into three different lanes. Lane 1 deals with the management of the public space and the role that DTSM in particular plays in choreographing and curating events, etc., on the promenade. Lane 2 deals with some of the regulatory, mostly land use regulations on the promenade. And you'll recall before November, it was in October, you had taken up a study session about a potential IZO related to promenade fronting properties, so we're still working on that. That's lane 2, and then lane 3 is the actual physical plan for the public infrastructure of the street. So the presentation I have tonight is just on the physical plan because that's new material that we presented to council that you haven't seen. Council's reaction on all three lanes was very positive. They said, go forth and be bold. So they really didn't pull back on any of the suggestions we made, which in the case of the physical plan, you'll see results in a pretty significant transformation of the street. I'm not going to go through a lot of this preamble material. It's the same presentation that we gave the City Council. So you recall there's a project vision. There are 7 project goals that flow out of that. You'll recall that we started this process a year ago with a physical assessment of the street, counting every crack in the sidewalk and mismatched pavers, and there's still phone booths out there. There's some pipes under the street that probably need to be repaired. We did the pretty extensive public life survey. We spent 2 full days last December, almost a year ago this week, surveying people through interviews and also just recording their behavior as they stood on the street or walked by. Came away with a series of some pretty interesting insights. We did a study session in March, I believe, with you, where we kind of reviewed all that material. There were these 5 insights that we thought we could actually test through this summer pilot projects, and I hope you had a chance in August and September to walk the promenade and see some of the activities that we put out on the street. There's just an inventory of number of chairs and stage, etc., that was put out on the street that we called the experiment, and the response on this was overwhelmingly positive. So this is the map. There's something on every block. And then some of the photographs of what we put out there. So movable chairs, these bistro chairs, kind of playful elements, the seesaw. The big hit was the kind of beach ball effect that we put over the center dinosaurs in the 1300 block. Those sort of moved in the wind and cast a really beautiful shadow down below, and the play landscape that was constructed was very popular with kids. It's a huge Instagram hit, actually. If you watched Instagram over the summer on 3rd Street Promenade, like at least 50% of the shots were the balloons. So in the experiment, as I said, it was a big hit. Some of the takeaways, we increased based on another survey we did in September. We kind of repeated the same public life survey in September. We increased the number of women and children as an overall percentage of people spending time on the promenade, particularly in that center play space. So that's a good trend direction. Businesses reported an increase in foot traffic and in some cases sales traffic during the time frame of the experiment, and we don't think that there was any other really significant factor, like no new major stores opened in that time frame, that would suggest that there was a reason for increased foot traffic other than we put new amenities out onto the street. This one, I think any of us who've studied William White are not surprised by this at all, but when you almost triple the number of public seats that are available on the promenade, you see a huge increase in the number of people who are actually sitting and using the promenade. So in last December, there's only 90 public seats, and less than 100 people who recorded walking up and down the promenade actually sat down, with almost 250 seats. 1 in 11 people were actually recorded sitting down. The seats are all movable, and so the other funny kind of anecdotal takeaway is that we'd arrange the colorful Adirondack chairs in the same pattern every single morning. The downtown ambassadors would do that. And on the 1400 block, by the end of the day, most of them had migrated to be in front of the Apple store as a kind of outdoor waiting room. So movable furniture was also a big hit, to be able to people to be able to create their own kind of social spaces. And so the ultimate design that we're headed toward relies heavily on movable furniture, as you'll see. One of the other things we're trying to accomplish is this is our baseline data from last December. This is the number of people on the street weekdays and weekends from 8 in the morning till the end of the day. You can see it sort of peaks during the mid-afternoon, indicating that there's a significant amount of kind of activity in the morning and late evening that we're not capturing. And after we did the pilot, we actually found that we had an evening uptick. And this kind of huge decline here is actually, our consultants told us that's actually an error. It sort of stays more even. So the big news is that by providing some of the amenities, we think that we were able to sort of increase people's stay time on the promenade into the evening. One of the reasons for that potentially is that the temporary stage that was put up at the end of the 1200 block, which is where the Christmas tree is going up right now, that stage was programmed every single day, including and sometimes in the evening. So it could be that people were coming for evening events. But one of the other kind of interesting facts that we learned is we thought we wanted to have a stage at the end of the street. The far north end is the kind of attraction to bring people to walk to all 3 blocks. And even though we were programming on that stage was relatively light, we did get some noise complaints from people who live in the neighborhoods north of Wilshire about activities that were occurring on the stage. So as we started working through the design, we realized that the primary stage probably needed to be in the 1300 block. So this is a case of we're designing and testing and learning as we sort of did this experiment over the summer. So here's an event that we did on the stage. We were on KCRW, so Francis Anderton spent some time with us. We did a number of workshops with property owners and focus groups of property owners to begin to sort of set what we told the property owners, really imagining a set of guardrails that as long as we had a design that lived within a certain set of parameters, they'd be willing to support it. If we wandered outside of those guardrails, then they would be challenged in their ability to support a project. So that's really what we're trying to get out of the property owners. And that really informed our direction that we took off of these 3 scenarios. So our design team at Rios Clemente Hale Studios and KPFF Engineering really sort of said there's basically 3 ways to approach it. There's approve, adapt, and transform. And these you can think of as being small, medium, and large in terms of their impact to the street itself, in terms of the amount of change that the street would see, but also, of course, the price tag associated with that. So improve is, somewhere in the $10 to $20 million territory, whereas the full transformation of the street pushes over $50 million. And in the end, after talking to property owners, they told us they'd really like to see what the full transformation would look like and what that would accomplish for them. And so that was the direction that we gave to Rios. We said, let's draw up the full transformation. Let's not pursue detailed drawings of the other 2 alternatives. So what does that look like? The full transformation means that virtually everything in the street would be replaced. The only thing that we would actually retain in the drawings that we'll show you momentarily are the palm trees. The palm trees are in good health. They have about another 30 years of life left in them, as opposed to the jacarandas, which are not in terribly good health. About half of the jacarandas would probably have to be replaced if we wanted to maintain jacarandas. The palm trees are also now considered an invasive species by the Coastal Commission, so we couldn't exactly move them or replace them en masse if we wanted to. So the transformation is a complete redo of the surface of the roadway, and we would bring that up to be a curbless street condition. So we'd eliminate the ADA challenges that the street has today. It allows us then to also really reimagine how service vehicles access the street. Right now, we need, well, in any scenario, we need roughly 14 feet of clearance for service vehicles to move up and down the street. So that's not just fire trucks, you know, paramedics, but it's also the sort of people who pick up the trash. It's the cherry pickers that have to go up and trim the palm trees periodically or hang the Christmas tree lights. So we need a 14-foot pathway, wide pathway for service vehicles. Under the current configuration of the street with the curbs, the only place we can have that pathway is between the curbs. So that really limits how we can use that real estate in the center of the street for programmed activities. So that was one of the reasons to think about doing a full transformation of the street. The other component that the full transformation of the street takes on, and is included in the kind of the larger price tag, is replacing underground pipes. There are sewer and stormwater mains, not mains, but lateral transfers underneath 3rd Street that were not replaced in 1980s when they redid the street then. So those pipes date back to at least the 60s. And we should probably replace them. So the improved scenario is very focused on where we would do improvements, but not so expensive as to say we're sort of throwing money away without replacing the pipes. The challenge with the ADAPT, the middle scenario, is that that does not replace the underground infrastructure. And so would end up having to be some sort of calculus that says how much money do you invest without dealing with the underground infrastructure before you're almost throwing the money away, when you know that infrastructure is going to have to be replaced in 10 years, or God forbid it bursts like sometimes our pipes do, and then you have to do an emergency repair. So all of that added up to property owners thinking that they really wanted to entertain the transformation scenario. And so as I said, that was the direction we gave to RIOS to pursue. So I'll walk you quickly through the kind of core ideas of the RIOS design. There's this basic diagram. You can see the 3 blocks. So Wilshire is over here on the left, Broadway and Santa Monica Place is on the right. So they've given the 3 different blocks these kind of different programmatic identities, as you can read there. And the colors will correspond as we move through to different kinds of program experiences. So each one of the blocks has a space, and in some cases maybe 2, where we can do different kinds of events. So these are either built-in stages or stages that can be, or spaces that can be utilized as stages for different kinds of program events. One of the things that DTSM in particular would like to see is one of these event spaces, probably the one at the 1300 block, be basically plug and play, ready to go. So if you've been out there for a major event, you see wires and generators all over the place to run the speakers, et cetera, and the lighting. So part of the underground infrastructure would also include providing all that event infrastructure already kind of pre-wired into one of these event spaces, as I said, probably in the 1300 block. One of the ideas that we were testing over the summer was what we called social eddies. So this is the idea that there are spaces on the street that allow you to get out of the flow of pedestrians. There are days when there are so many people moving up and down the promenade that it's actually hard to stop. You sort of feel like a salmon in a river. And so we were sort of testing the idea that maybe we could create these spaces that were sort of smaller, intimate, where people could stop and sit in the middle of the street, kind of get out of the flow and just sort of enjoy the theater of the street itself. And so there are various places designed in the kind of plan for these kinds of experiences. One of the big ideas is to consolidate the farmers market at Arizona and 3rd. So we'd sort of lean into the fact that we close Arizona for the farmers market. But what we're designing for is and proposing is that the portion of the farmers market that closes 2nd Street would actually move up onto the promenade itself. And so you can see trailing north and south from Arizona, we're providing market space, and you'll see how that looks in some of the detailed plans momentarily. So this is both the Wednesday and the Saturday's farmers market, but we're also imagining this could be any kind of market that utilizes this kind of standard 10 by 10 tent, and in some cases maybe a smaller market that doesn't need to close Arizona. So that could be, we've had all sorts of ideas of there, could be like a monthly used book fair, there could be pet adoption, there could be a flower market, particularly with the holiday season, a Christmas market or a holiday market, craft market would be very appealing. So there's lots of different ideas for that. It could also be other kinds of community festivals. So one of the things also has come up is like a Korean food festival, or different Korean food vendors that sort of utilize the tents to do kind of a food festival of some kind. And then we're also identifying locations where significant public art could be located, and they're generally falling, as you can see, at the intersections of the east-west boulevards. And so these could be new elements. We have some ideas for what kind of new elements we'd like to see, but obviously this is where the Arts Commission and other folks in the arts community would need to weigh in. And these could be locations for the current dinosaur fountains and sculptures. The design you'll see does not include the dinosaurs in their current location. We have proposed, we told Rios, do not feel encumbered by those, and they did not when they drew up plans. But these locations for public art are possible places we could relocate some of the dinosaurs if that was a kind of community desire. But one of the ideas we're proposing is at the very north end of the street at Wilshire is that we would build some sort of observation tower that would reach up, somewhere around on the order of 50, 60 feet. We've joked that it would be 66 feet tall since we're at the end of Route 66. And we don't have a design for that. It's just kind of an idea. I think this is probably a place for would be a great opportunity for a public design competition. But it serves a number of purposes in terms of creating a visual icon to draw you to the end of the street, and then allow you to stand up, look back down the street, get your photo opportunity, but also be able to look down Wilshire out to the ocean, so you get the experience of being adjacent to the ocean. And then we would also have a number of places for retail concessions. So we completely reimagined the CART program and the two market pavilions that sit in the street today. They'd be sort of done in a different format and different ways on the 3 blocks. So put all this together, you get this kind of a diagram, and then this is the sort of plan view that Rios has drawn up, and I will show you these purple cones indicate 3 perspectives they've drawn. I will show you those 3 perspectives and the corresponding plan view, and then entertain your feedback and discussion. And we have the full plan drawn up that we could go through tonight, or you could come to the open house and exhibit we'll have, and we'll have that up on the wall. Fairly large. I think it's almost like 9 feet long when we plotted it out. So this, let me jump to this perspective. This is the view from Santa Monica Place looking north. So in this particular configuration on this block, we basically, it's the one that's the most similar to the street as it's configured today, wherein there are going to be, we propose, here's the existing palm trees, fairly significant new shade trees, with the primary flow of pedestrians and service vehicles running down the center of the street, and then kind of amenity and program spaces flanking on the side. And then these would be a set of shade canopies of some kind, and kind of a sort of landscape and fountain zone serving as the gateway to the street from the promenade. So this is what you're seeing from the plan view. And then these zones here under the shade trees would be for movable furniture, potentially retail kiosks. It'd be a great place for the buskers and street performers to set up and kind of take over a space between 2 of the trees, let's say, and kind of utilize that for performance. What we're showing here underneath the trees is a proposal to do a heavy timber boardwalk. So this would be evocative of the pier or the beachside boardwalks, to sort of evoke that sort of beachside experience, and also to serve as a kind of to mitigate the heat island effect that we have with all the concrete and granite that the street has today. When we get to the middle of the 1300 block, what we're proposing, and in the plan view, we would have the street configuration changes. So in this on the 1300 block, the 1400 block, the boardwalk material goes to the center of the street, and between the existing palm trees to the edge of that boardwalk, we maintain that 14-foot clearance that we need for service vehicles and most pedestrian, and then this becomes the primary pedestrian flow on both sides of the street. These are the existing palm trees, and this was important to property owners. Many of them, or a number of them, utilize the space between the facade to the center line of the palm trees for outdoor dining, so that's maintained on all 3 blocks. But what we're trying to do here is by creating the boardwalk space down the center, this becomes space that we can utilize for different kinds of programs. Pedestrians are now sort of, in a way, forced to walk closer to the storefronts in this configuration. So we would imagine here in the 1300 block, there's a built-in stage. So this is, the boardwalk lifts up to be roughly 30 inches or so high. So there's a kind of stage set up. Then there's a plaza here. This would be a fountain. This is one of those kind of jet fountains that Rios has just completed at the Music Center in downtown LA. So you have the jet fountain, so kids are playing in it when the fountain is on, but you could turn the fountain off. It dries out really quickly. It's essentially a flat surface. You could set up a bunch of chairs there for an event or a concert. And then this zone here, under these trees, would be just out of view here as a concession pavilion. So this becomes a space for outdoor dining and potentially utilized as VIP events or VIP spaces for a concert, let's say. It's one of the things DTSM gets a number of requests for events where they would have a VIP space where they could also serve alcohol. So this space here is designed to accommodate that. And DTSM's office is just out of frame here as well, and they currently use their office as the green room, so they're very convenient to this particular location. This is where the center dinosaurs are, where we did the balloons and beach ball effect this summer. So a notion of what this space might look like. So all the kind of lighting and the electronics and et cetera you would need for an event at the stage, which would be right over here, is all kind of pre-wired into the light fixtures and overhead catenaries. And then the last intersection, or last place that Rios rendered, is the intersection at Arizona, where we have the farmers market space. So again, we have the same configuration with the sort of boardwalk material. This would be roughly 25 feet wide. And then here, the trees land every 25 or 30 feet on center. So in between these trees in this box here, you could put in 4 of those 10 by 10 tents. So you can imagine the farmers markets on Arizona, then you loop down and you can kind of do the full loop around. Or if it's a market that doesn't close Arizona, you just kind of loop through the promenade itself. We're proposing at Arizona, in fact, all the intersections to do a speed table at the street. So since we've moved in this scheme to a curbless street, the entire surface of the promenade is now at sidewalk level. So the proposition is to do a speed table at all intersections, so pedestrians continue walking at the sidewalk level. Cars sort of bump up to the zone of the pedestrians, so there's that kind of cue that cars are entering the pedestrian space. We're also proposing on all the intersections that we move the safety bollards out to the curb line. So as pedestrians are waiting to cross, when the lights are there, they're waiting behind the safety bollards, protecting them from cars nonetheless. And probably entertain some other kind of surface treatments on the pavement to cue to pedestrians they're about to cross into a car zone. At the Market Square area, we're proposing that we could have a hydraulic stage, so this would be level when there was not in use, but if we wanted to have a stage or put the Christmas tree or something there, stage would lift out of the ground, and then in the rendering, then you could imagine that there could be, say, like a blues grass band or a jazz band or somebody performing on a market day. But when that stage isn't needed, it would drop back down. When there wasn't a market in this particular space, then there'd just be kind of movable chairs and furniture underneath the trees. So you'd have this kind of nice tree canopy for kind of casual interactions and socialization. We also think that this intersection would be a fantastic place to do a really significant piece of public art. There's a number of artists that engage in kind of aerial hanging structures. So this wispy kind of form that's in purple hanging in the sky, that might actually, we're sort of thinking that could be like this kind of aerial canvas or kind of aerial artwork that sort of hangs over there and indicates that Arizona and 3rd Street is a really significant kind of market square and kind of in a way the sort of main square of downtown Santa Monica. This scheme then also kind of anticipates and can adapt to any number of the different kind of closure options that have been discussed for Arizona over the past year or two. So whether that's a full closure of Arizona or partial closure or only a closure between the alleys, this scheme sort of leans into that and kind of would accommodate that notion very well. So we had proposed a set of policy questions on all 3 lanes to the city council. They were affirmative and said go forth on all 3 with these questions and all 3 policies or all 3 lanes. So the idea that we would pursue this particular plan for the promenade, the council endorsed. They were open to all the ideas we proposed. So with that, we decided we would set up the farmers market and or the event at the promenade that's coming up on Saturday, and start doing talking to lots of different groups and getting feedback. So I presented this same presentation to the Arts Commission. Now you trying to get on the agenda for Architecture Review Board before the year's out, but depends on their workload. And we'll probably visit a number of other commissions in January. We would anticipate then taking all that feedback, refining the design, and then ultimately bringing all this back to City Council at the end of March is our current time frame. So with that, thank you for your
Thank you.
time.
We have no chits, so are there questions of staff? No? Mario?
I have 2 questions. In the Arizona intersection, you've got some funny squiggles that look like some sort of freeform.
In the plan?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the potential profile, the aerial artwork
Oh, I
or
see,
whatever
okay.
that could be over the intersection.
And then my second question, it really is more futuristic. In the life of these plans, which let's say is 30 years till Promenade 4.0.
Right. Based on the time frame of the last
Right,
year.
right.
We won't be here.
Well, some of us might. So, but somewhere along the way, there will be a subway coming down Wilshire. And I don't know if the end of this promenade is going to be where the station is for this corner of Santa Monica or this end of Santa Monica, or will it be at Palisades Park? Has there been any discussion? Has there been any interaction to like start preparing us if we are going to be affected by it? Maybe we aren't. Maybe the intersection is going to be at 5th Street or something. Parachutes, you know?
Yeah.
I'm asking, have you
Hyperloop.
have you looked at anything that?
Well, it's a good question. We haven't really adjusted our design to sort of say that's what we would, to say there's a subway portal there. But it certainly has come up because in the conversations we've had about what to design on the 1200 block, a lot of it has been about generating foot traffic and increasing the foot traffic on the
Right.
1200 block, because it's just, it performs in that respect it so much less so than the other blocks, as you know. And a few people have said all we need to do is get the subway there, and then our foot traffic problems are solved, because that becomes the main gateway,
Sure.
of course. And so that's come up. The other issue that's come up that I think is relevant here is what's at the base of this tower, which in a way is kind of pure architectural folly as we've proposed it. What's the function at the base of that tower other than an elevator door and a stairwell? So if somehow that engaged and became part of the gateway to a subway portal, that would make a pretty significant architectural element, I think. So we could explore kind of what that means and kind of how that intersection at Arizona could engage with a potential subway portal. I would say from the property owner's perspective, DTSM's perspective, I would say they would probably want to see the subway portal, and I assume there'd probably be 2 of them if you look at the model they have for other subways on the Wilshire line or other station stops. They would probably want to see one of those subway portals actually exit directly out onto 3rd Street. We'd probably want to advocate for that, I would think.
Well, I would think that unless there's some overriding concern, we would agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. We've also talked relative to Wilshire, we've also talked to Joe San Clemente and the mobility team that's doing the Wilshire Safety Corridor. They don't have, as I understand it, any really kind of pressing need to address 3rd Street and Wilshire, that intersection. So what we've generally proposed with our plans is that we would do curb extensions, since we now have a curbless street that's at the level of the sidewalk, that would have curb extensions going out, you know, the 7 or 8 feet that would ordinarily be for parked cars on all corners of that intersection at Wilshire.
So
to
there
tighten
wouldn't
that
be a speed table on Wilshire?
up. That's been up for discussion. Some people have said we should do it there, and other people have said we shouldn't. Some people have even said let's not do speed tables at all. There's a concern that speed tables, pedestrians are walking down the promenade, they're staring at their phones, they don't even realize they're walking into a street.
Right.
So that needs a little bit further study. I would say the Arizona intersection to work as the market square that we've proposed, we'd really want to do the speed table there. And of all the other intersections going south, they all have, you know, some form of pavement treatment that's been done over the years. Arizona is still asphalt, and pretty badly cracked asphalt at that. But similarly with Wilshire. So the Wilshire intersection needs a little bit more study than we've given it so far.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Fresco, do you have a question or you just want to discuss it?
I have discussion.
Okay, so Commissioner Landers.
So, thank you, Alan. I have 2 questions about the scope of the transform, in the hope that this will sort of inform what comes back to us in Redline. One is, there was some discussion in the committee, as I remember, about the connection for stormwater capture, and that the full excavation under the road could actually give us an opportunity to ensure some connections for stormwater capture. If I'm not mistaken, there was a question about where the outlet was. Am I misremembering?
No, you are correct. We did have that discussion. My understanding is that the storm water collected on 3rd Street makes its way to the Smurf facility by the pier
It does already.
already.
So we don't need to build any more. There was some question of when we dug up the pipes and we relayed pipes, there was an opportunity to do something better.
That's my understanding of where the water goes
Okay.
today.
My second question is, does the scope of transform also include potentially capital improvements in the alleyways, to the extent that we've had some conversations about reimagining some of those spaces given the loading and unloading issues, the questions of bollarding at different times if we're imagining different uses for the alleyways at different hours?
Right. KPFF and the cost estimator have not included in these kind of benchmark costs any capital improvements to the alleys. So if we were to entertain capital improvements to the alleys, we'd have to identify what those are and then put those into the plan. And I would say at this point, we haven't developed our thinking on the alleys well enough to be able to sort of say exactly what we might want to do with the alleys, whether they're being bullered off in some ways or other kinds of improvements. That's still an evolving conversation.
Okay, I mean, I think when we're talking about the financing of the project long term, we're going to get one bite at this apple, and so my instinct would be to say let's get as much information up front as we can in order to make informed decisions. If things get left off the table, fine, but right, wouldn't it make sense for us to have that info for a more informed decision?
I would agree. I think that would make a lot of sense if we are imagining a scope of improvements, that it would probably make sense to put them all on the table.
Okay.
I mean, one of the other issues that we will have to address or design towards is that the likely funding mechanism for this is going to be some form of an assessment district to the property owners. To the extent that there are improvements that go beyond 3rd Street, it starts to make, that are part of that assessment district, and may make that more appealing to property owners who are on 2nd or 4th Street, for example.
Right, and also benefit those property owners to the extent that the alley improvements would make their properties more usable for more hours of the day.
Right.
Right. My last question is related, which is we are also anticipating some different uses coming in For example, the RFP that's out on converting a parking structure to housing. Are there, that you mentioned the Arizona closure models, right, which haven't
Right.
been determined. There are a couple of projects pending in the neighborhood, more than a couple, actually, 3 within a block, right?
And not insignificant projects.
Right. And one of those has, I mean, I'm imagining they must be thinking about the subway as well, in terms of the relationship between the promenade and whatever happens at Second Street. But are there any additional capital infrastructure considerations that need to be accounted for with those changes?
The one that has come up the most frequently in our conversations has been mid-block crossings and mid-block passages. That's kind of related to the alley discussion. It's not a parallel conversation, so it was a perpendicular one, literally.
Literally.
That's the one that's come up the most. My partner Kathleen Rawson from DTSM has just joined us, so maybe she could speak to some other things that she's heard from her stakeholders and constituents that might be coming up. We're trying to coordinate as best we can with the RFP with that Housing Economic Development has put out for parking structure 3.
Right.
In terms of mid-block crossings to connect 3rd Street all the way out to 4th Street,
Yes.
and then also to make sure that we're providing consolidated, common trash enclosures for everybody on that block portion of the street and that block. And once they make a selection to a project team, we'll have more tangible conversations. So at the moment, that's kind of the most kind of grounded conversation we've had. On that.
I have a couple questions. One is the timing once the funding is secured, which hopefully it will be. Are you seeing this as a phased project? And if so, is it block by block or component by component? I imagine that would be the more economic way to go.
We haven't really dived into that too much, given that we're still trying to define what the design actually is. Our cost estimates assume some sort of phasing strategy and kind of phasing plan that drags the construction schedule and therefore the cost out over a period of time. So conceptually what we've thought is that we could rebuild the center of the street and do this sort of centerpiece first and then do the sort of zone up against the buildings. That's how Promenade 2.0, the current version of it, was built. And in fact, in some cases, they actually didn't even replace the concrete sidewalk from the 1965 version of the Promenade when they built it in '89. We think we probably need to replace it all. But how we would do that is we haven't quite dived into.
Okay.
I think we would definitely need to have an answer as to how that is going to happen before property owners would be willing to entertain an assessment district, I believe.
Okay, thank you. The other point I had, or question I had was, I worked in the city of LA during the construction of the Red Line, and I saw the effect of that, and this is nowhere near a subway construction project, but I saw the effect on businesses in Hollywood, and it was disastrous. Not to mention the sinkhole, which we're not going to be dealing with here, hopefully. Are the property owners concerned about business loss, and is there any kind of compensation in that case?
The answer to the first question is yes, for sure. They're very concerned
Yeah, I would
about
think it would be.
what this means. And the conversations we've had internally in the city in terms of economic development and finance has been part of our financing model and plan for the construction of this needs to assume that there could potentially be or is likely to be some form of business and therefore sales tax loss during the period of construction. And so revenue projections for sales tax coming off the promenade should not assume the same rosy scenario
Right.
we've been living under during the 18
I guess
to
I'm more
24 months
concerned
of
about the effect on the
construction.
retailers than I am on the city's budget. And if there aren't sales taxes, that means there aren't sales. So
Yes.
I just want to make sure that, it's already a precarious balance of retail on the promenade, and I'd hate to see that. And I'm sure you thought of all this. Yes.
Yeah. And it's an evolving conversation, but it comes up in every meeting we have with property owners, I would say.
And then finally, I think when we ultimately see the Red Line, which hopefully will be soon, it's going to address the alleys, as Commissioner Landris pointed out, and that's been really a major part of our discussion of activating the alleys.
Right.
And if we're doing that red line to incentivize businesses locating back there, it seems logical there'd be like a physical improvement plan that goes hand in hand with it. Otherwise, people are not going to locate there. So I would just want to reinforce what he said, and that is that that you include the alleys in what you're designing right now, because I think it's really important if we're going to proceed along that path.
Very good point.
Thank
And,
you.
and when you say red lines, you're referring to the IZO language.
Yeah, I'm
correct?
not talking about financing boycott.
Right, yeah. Yeah, incidentally, we were thinking we might be able to be back in front of you with the IZO draft language early part of next year. I was originally thinking maybe in January, but after Jing put up the calendar for your workload in January, I think February is the more realistic early option.
Do we see IZOs before they're?
Typically, no.
Yeah.
Typically, no,
Yeah.
but I think given the subject matter, you know, we wanted to make sure that the commission had a look at it before the council.
Okay.
Cool.
That's great.
Do you have any questions? Not to catch you the minute you walk in the door.
I appreciate the opportunity, but I think, I don't know if you guys are where you're on in this hearing. at
We've
this
already
point.
heard the presentation. We actually put Nebraska off to the end.
Okay, so that's fine. So I think I'll wait if there's going to be public testimony, and maybe I'll have a couple questions after
Okay,
that.
cool.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're ready for discussion. There are no chits. Did someone submit a chit and, nope, there's no chit. Thank you, Alan,
you.
as always. So the matter is now before the commission for discussion. Commissioner Fresco.
As you know, because I sent you the letter that I sent to council about this, I'm really excited about this project and all of the creative modalities that they're coming up with to change things. But of course, I always have a little bit of a concern about our historic resources in that area. And I just wanted to point out, just for example, I guess what I'm really concerned about is that we're giving a lot of lip service to authenticity, but I'm not actually seeing any of it actually coming out. And the first thing I see here, for example, are these glass or whatever they are, shade structures that are big, tall things right in front of really a major historic building that is in itself a gateway. And so I would much rather, that's like a really prime, perfect example of, I think, what would make this feel like it was a streetscape improvement that is responding to historic resources and important buildings that are already there. And one way that perhaps this design team could make sure that they're thinking about that and designing with those buildings that the city is planning to keep would be maybe to not make all of those the white boxes here. And, you know, this Keller block is a gateway. There's just no question. I don't think we need more gateways. So, and along that same line, using the same kind of paving all the way across around the different features, again, obliterates the idea that this was ever a street. And we don't need to keep curbs, we can do a new thing, but that idea should still exist. We should still remember that. Another thing that concerns me, honestly, is those string lights. I don't even know how we can put in string lights with all of our dark sky ordinances. And I think the worst, they're of course the worst when you're under them, because it just feels like you're indoors except that there's weather. But you can't see the sky, you can't see the moon or a star, because it's just a ceiling of brightness. And I think they're light pollution, and I would rather the promenade have stars and moons and not string lights. So I know that's a design feature and not a planning commission feature, but I got to get there. Same thing, another thing that also, Sorry, and then the last thing I just have to throw out there is that I'm really not excited about an observation tower. In the 1920s and 30s, there was this one little old lady who would write to the city council like every couple of months because she wanted an observation tower like that in Palisades Park. And at one point she was like, hey, we can commemorate John P. Jones with that guy, with the tower. We could do, it could, and she offered to pay for it. And everybody was like, why do we need to build a thing to appreciate the beauty when it is the beauty that is there? And all this tower makes me think is we're building things that are too big, too close to our ocean, that we now have to build towers so we can see over them to see the ocean. And it seems redundant with what we have. We have the view, we have the bluff. At least for now, when you're standing at the end of the promenade, you can actually see the ocean. You can see the park, you can see, I just really think it's redundant and not the kind of authenticity that we're going for. It kind of turns our city, our views from the promenade into a Disneyland feature and not an authentic, we are at the top of a bluff with an amazing ocean view. So it's really, all of my comments are really kind of reminding you that making it authentic is an active thing to do. It's not something that's going to happen because we say that it's authentic. We have to actually do things specifically with that in mind for it to actually come out that way at the other end.
Mr. Landris.
So, at the risk of being oblique, can I just, I think, incorporate my comments by reference to my questions? I think it's the alleyways, the question of water runoff, just making sure that we're covered there, and the relationship to other uses that might be anticipated for the broader area. That would be my encouragement, and is to go not necessarily to commit to all of these things right now, but at least to have all the information so that a decision can be made about an assessment, because we will have one bite, we will have one shot.
Okay, thank you. That's it. All right. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Kathleen. Fine to move on. We are now on item 9A, which is a development review permit for property at 3030 Nebraska Avenue. Yeah, totally, unless you stop somewhere on the way. Okay, so ex parte communications, disclosures. Mario?
None.
You went by it.
I have no present day disclosures, but just for the record, I was on the Landmarks Commission when it was designated a million years ago and then overturned forthwith.
Okay. Commissioner Landris, nothing?
I did not drive. I have driven past the site on multiple occasions, but I didn't do it specially for this one.
Commissioner Reese?
I have nothing in particular to report. I haven't talked to any of the applicants, any of the team members, any staff about this, and I did not specifically drive by that site.
I drove by it this afternoon after the rain stopped, and had seen SciArc many times before, but I just wanted to see the area around it. And so I didn't walk, but I drove around it and got a good sense of it. Should I give them the option? We wanted to ask you, since there are only 5 commissioners here tonight, if you would rather wait until we have a full commission to hear the project. Roll ahead. Okay. I was afraid you were going to say that. Okay, staff report, please.
Yes, good evening. I'm Grace Page, Senior Planner, and I'll be going over the project proposal involving a development review permit, case number 19 ENT 0117. I'd like to start with just providing a clarification to the project description in light of a comment that was received from the public. There is a slight tweak to the request. So it's a development review permit to allow a new 4-story, 36-foot-high mixed-use development within the mixed-use creative district of the Bergamot Area Plan. The project includes 183 residential units, approximately 8,473 square feet of ground floor commercial space, 2 subterranean levels of creative office space and residential amenities, 3 levels of subterranean parking designed to accommodate 395 parking spaces and 284 bicycle parking spaces located throughout the site. That is the original description, and this is being added. As volunteered by the developer, one 50% income deed restricted affordable 1-bedroom unit will be provided on site in addition to the 9 2-bedroom units required by the Affordable Housing Production Program.
Can you repeat that again? What was the level there of the one?
As volunteered by the developer, one 50% income deed restricted affordable 1-bedroom unit will be provided on site in addition to the 9 2-bedroom units required by the Affordable Housing Production Program.
I thought this was all extremely low because they used the 5%.
The extremely low is applicable to the 2-bedroom, the nine units. The one that's being volunteered
Oh,
or
okay,
added
I got
is
it.
at 50%.
I gotcha. Okay. So there are 10 units altogether.
We do want to note that the revised STOA should be in front of you on,
Okay.
you should have copies of it
I just
on
want to be clear, there
device.
are 10 affordable units we're talking about right now.
Correct.
In
Okay.
total, correct. Okay. So just to give you a quick introduction, this is a Tier 1 project proposal. It is a mixed-use development. It incorporates commercial, residential, and creative office. It's within the Bergamot area plan of the city. It's sub-zoning as mixed-use creative district. There's an overlay along Nebraska Avenue, and it has a pedestrian priority overlay as well as a retail priority overlay. The right-hand side depicts the location of the project site. As you can see, it's along Nebraska between Olympic Boulevard, and then references to Berkeley Street and Stanford as well. The project is 4 stories, 36 feet in height. The parcel size is 74,250 square feet. The floor area for the project is 1.43 FAR. And on this page, you'll see the breakdown of the 183 residential units. The ground floor does include about 8,500 square feet of retail commercial space that is oriented towards Nebraska pursuant to that overlay. There are 2 below-grade levels referred to in the plans as C1 and C2. These levels are excluded from floor area ratio per the Bergamot area plan. There's approximately 52,000 square feet of creative office and just a little over 40,000 square feet of residential storage and amenity space. There are 3 levels of subterranean parking below that. It accommodates 395 parking spaces, which also include 10 car share and carpool spaces, and residential parking is provided in those garage spaces as well. Here's a quick overview of the garage plan, P3, level P3, P2, and P1. P1 being closest to grade, and P1 also houses several trash rooms, which are accommodate the trash and refuse and recycling, which would then have the bins transferred to grade where there would be a staging area to allow for servicing and pickup. And then above those 3 levels of subterranean, there is a reference to level C2. This is the below grade level that accommodates some creative office space as well as some residential amenity and storage areas. As you can see, it's arranged around a central courtyard configuration, and that they anticipate to provide some landscaping and seating opportunities. This courtyard would be a privatized courtyard and not necessarily available for the public to access. And above that, and sea level, level C1, which can overlook into the courtyard, is also a split of residential amenity space and creative office space. So to maybe give you a more 3-dimensional look of how this arrangement is, if you were to take the building and slice it like a cake, this is a cross-section view. I've labeled P3 down at the most bottom level, P2, P1. C2 is where that courtyard space is, and then C1 would overlook into C2, but all of these levels are below grade with, say, this being the ground plane along Nebraska Avenue. So let's move up above grade now. oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to add a few images. So how might that space feel in that below grade courtyard? This is a rendering provided by the architect of how that C2 level may feel with the openings to the sky as well. And then if you were to stand on level C1, this is how you may perceive the space as you're able to look down into C2 and then also to look up towards the sky and at the street level here. Okay, so now moving to grade. This is the site plan of the ground floor and Nebraska at the top of the page here. The red outlines the property line for the large site. This is the pedestrian priority overlay as well as the retail overlay. The areas highlighted in gray are the retail spaces. They are required to have a depth of at least 40 feet, which they comply with, and to have active spaces along that frontage. The project's primary public open space is oriented towards Nebraska Avenue with this large plaza area that sort of funnels you in towards what would be the primary access into the lower levels. There are some ground floor units. I think there's approximately 30 or so at this level. 2 of the affordable units are at grade. The project is not required to provide for any street enhancements. The applicant is proposing 2 private driveway, both on the east and west end. So here on the site, there is a 2-way access driveway, a private drive, and it does allow for vehicles to enter the garage from the east end. Along the west end, the condition's a little different. The property actually goes down the existing sort of driveway as it is today. And there is an easement agreement, so they have to exercise the ability to provide for at least that direction of lane, while the other property is also required to provide the opposite direction. So this is the perimeter of the site, and the ground floor is also oriented in a way to continue this open to the sky concept from below grade up all the way up to the sky. So how might that front plaza feel or dimensionally appear? In the left-hand side, upper left-hand corner, that would be Nebraska and the primary open space area in this rendering. And on the right-hand side, the project also has a secondary smaller plaza along Nebraska, and that's how that space would also feel. You can see sort of into the project, you can see the walkways of the building that are connected with the residential floors up above. So the upper levels, the formats are pretty similar. For this particular level, because the ground floor heights of the commercial spaces are 18 feet of clearance, this floor is sort of the intermediate floor, as you wouldn't be able to put units here because it has to have the 18-foot clearance. There are 2 affordable units being provided on this level as well. Moving upward, this is the 3rd level. There are 3 affordable units identified on the plan, as well as a residential amenity. There's a pool located on the east courtyard. This is the 4th floor, allowing for 2 more additional 2-bedroom units. And then for the roof, the project complies is designed to meet the solar requirements of the Bergamot area plan. So all the grid pattern that you see is for the photovoltaic panels. And the other areas have really been addressed to provide some residential amenities. There is a lounge area, there's places to cook, there's a yoga deck. They're also looking to put like a cinema lawn on the roof, and also to provide for some rooftop garden areas. So how might those open spaces feel? There's such a variety of them, right? So there's ones that the public can access from Nebraska. There's some private space in the lower courtyards below grade. There's roof deck amenities. They're even showing a playground here. And then opportunities for rooftop gardening. So the project does integrate a variety of open space. It also complies with the minimum amount of open space and public open space as designed for the project. The project did go to preliminary design review before the Architectural Review Board back in May of 2018. There were several comments related to the project site design, mass and scale, and open space. The project has been revised since then, but on the top half, the images are of what the board had seen. So there was only one primary open space with the massing relief at the center. And also the building footprint. There wasn't as much congregation of open space open to the sky. There were more like slivers, so this sort of 3 or E shape. Those were the areas that were open to the sky. The applicant really looked to revise a site plan to sort of consolidate for larger, more meaningful areas that would be open. And so below is the revised building footprint. And below is also a revised rendering of how they're trying to look at massing strategies from either materiality, additional articulation in the facade, and also another additional cut for a smaller plaza area to accompany the primary plaza area. Staff has reviewed the project for CEQA compliance, and this project is exempt from the provisions of CEQA and is subject to complying with the Transit Priority Project exemption. The attachments are provided in the staff report. We did do public noticing, mailing of the hearing notices. The notice was posted in the local paper. There was also on-site posting of the hearing, and staff did receive one email comment pertaining to the CEQA exemption and concerns related to that. I believe you have a copy of that as well. So in summary, it's a Tier 1 project. The community benefits section does not apply. The project is greater than 15,000 square feet, so it is subject to the development review permit findings. This project is at least 2/3 residential use, so it is the Housing Accountability Act applies. The project does satisfy the AHP requirements with the 2 9-bedroom units that are deed restricted to 30% income households. And the developer is voluntarily providing one additional unit, which is a 1-bedroom, to be restricted to 50% income households. This is a transit priority project with a CEQA exemption. So in conclusion, staff recommends approval of the DR based on the findings and subject to the conditions within the draft revised or redlined statement of official action. And then below, I've just sort of provided the highlights of conditions that are related to ARB and deed restrictions, corporate housing and lodging, case management, and affordable units, and I've provided the numbers for your reference. And that concludes my presentation.
We can ask questions of staff now. Is that what you want to do?
Thank you for the presentation and the staff report. A couple of clarifying questions for you is, can you explain, well, first of all, what's the current definition in the code for rounding? For example, the 5%, I think it was brought to it was raised to us that it was over 9%, and I didn't have a chance to look at our code to see what we say about rounding.
Rounding can be applied in different ways. So we have rounding of quantities, but then I think when it comes to
Density. I'm talking about density.
Okay. So the project is required to provide 5% at very low income. I'm just going to do the math out loud. So 5% of 183 units is 9.15. 9 units are provided in the whole number. But the applicant, if the number is less than 0.75, then they can fee out the little remainder. So in this case, they're going to fee out 0.15 because it's less than 0.75.
They're going to fee out 1.5, and then they're going to provide an additionals.
They're going to fee out 0.15, provide the 9 affordable units. But in light of the comment received from the public, the applicant is voluntarily providing this 10th unit It's not a AHPP required 10th unit.
Okay. And is there any way, in no way is this application touching on the state density bonus? It's not getting, okay, I didn't think so. Can you talk to me a little bit about the definition of floor area in terms of, I believe I read in here, of course I didn't hear it in the presentation tonight, that below grade commercial did not count as floor area?
That is correct. So one of the provisions in the Bergamot area plan was to provide some flexibility with spaces that were below grade. And there is a provision that indicates that commercial or floor spaces below grade shall not count towards floor area.
Okay, so that's how they're getting around the commercial portion of it. But then on top of it, I believe I also read somewhere that they needed to add residential floor area in the basement to meet the qualifications for the CE.
The staff report alludes to, for the project to qualify as a housing project per the Housing Accountability Act, it needs to have at least 2/3 or 66% of the project be deemed for residential use. So if the subterranean or the below grade levels of residential amenity and storage were not included in that tabulation, then it would not satisfy that requirement.
Was the below grade commercial part of that tabulation?
I'm sorry?
Well, you're saying that it's 60%. I'm seeing a lot of nods behind you, but you're saying that it had to meet a certain criteria to meet the Housing Accountability Act. And so they had to add in commercial or residential floor area underground to meet that. My question to you is, was the commercial underground considered as part of that ratio?
Yes, the entirety of the square footage.
Okay.
Can I just also clarify? So when we talk about floor area in Bergamot, and this is actually carried over to the zoning ordinance as well for consistency across the whole city. So subterranean floor area does not count for the FAR calculation. That is because the calculation of FAR is really, it's a measure of building mass, above ground building mass. So that was a policy decision, that the council made like years ago, that FAR really counts for above grade mass. Floor area for all other, whether it's for parking calculations, for environmental analysis, traffic, what have you, that all does count. So it's not like it's not like it just disappears if it's subterranean. It's simply just for the FAR calculation it's exempted.
Yeah, which is just odd to me because in one sense we're and this is what I'm struggling with the project is, in one sense we're saying the commercial floor area doesn't count. That's underground
for the FAR calculation, but it does count for example, for the HAA qualification, what have you. It is still floor area for all that purpose. So when you look at the project as a whole, right, we look at floor area as above and below grade. That's the total floor area of the project, and that's what we would look at in terms of whether it meets the definition of a housing project under the HAA.
Okay. I mean, I hear what you guys are saying. I'm struggling.
Yeah,
with
no,
that.
I
I'm
understand.
struggling with the fact that in one sense it's floor area, in one sense it's not floor area.
Yes, yeah.
And if we say what's below grade is not floor area, then how do we translate that into there's that floor area below grade that helps them with the Housing Accountability Act? So that's really where my question is.
If the areas that are labeled as residential amenity, I think it is, that are below grade right now, if those were not, labeled for residential amenity, this project would not qualify as a housing project, wouldn't meet that definition. But because it is, labeled as that, it does meet it because it's the definition under the state law is that 2/3 of the floor area must be for residential use. So that's how.
Okay. And then another question I had is just relates to parking.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
I was waiting for you. It relates to parking, and with affordable units, there's a lot of state law that allows them to reduce parking below the 1.5 standard. It wasn't clear to me that they were able to, that they sought to take advantage of that.
No, they didn't ask for any concessions related to parking.
Okay.
So, just to add to your comment related to residential use and floor area, if the project didn't have any of those subterranean or below grade spaces, the project would comply with the Housing Accountability Act. So if we just eliminated the idea of C1 and C2 levels, the majority of the project would be housing.
Right. Interesting idea. Thank you. Those are my questions right now.
Okay, Commissioner Fonda Bernardi.
Yeah, so following up on those questions, what exactly is a residential amenity? What do you see happening, or what were you told was going to happen? And I'm asked that of the developer too, but as far as your understanding of it.
I would direct that question more to the applicant. Staff saw the plans, and we saw the spaces were somewhat divided. It could be storage, but then how is storage going to function? And is it an amenity? What exactly is? Is it a gym? Is it a meeting room? It was not specified, but to ensure that those spaces are residential uses, there is a condition crafted to ensure that would be condition number 3, to deed restrict those spaces for residential use, whatever that final use or amenity might be.
But as far as I can see, maybe you can find it on this table, having to do with parking, it does not create any parking. It kind of is kind of invisible, whatever load it creates. Let's say it's a gym, and there's a gym instructor or somebody who works in that gym. They're kind of, did I understand that correctly? I don't see any parking covering those floor areas.
Those sort of residential common areas there's not a parking requirement for them, because it's typically an amenity to the residents who the parking is accounted for, the unit types.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand that. It just seems like it's a huge amenity. It's like thousands of square
Yes,
feet.
it's 40-some thousand
That
square feet.
are kind of would make these very luxurious units. You'd put bowling alleys down there. I don't know what else would happen in these very large spaces, because they're very deep, and they're going to be all artificially lit because they're so deep. There's no way to get natural light in there. So it's kind of a mystery what's going on. My second question has to do with the private street, the one on the east side. Is that street going to go through, quote unquote, to Olympic? And who owns the property that would be the extension of that street?
The applicant can probably go into a little more detail about that east end, that strip. My understanding there's an easement agreement to continue use through to Olympic. So I believe it's another parcel deep to the south.
Right, that's what it seems to look on the plans. That's what you see. There's one parcel there. But because it's quote unquote a private street, does that mean that if that owner of that parcel wanted to put a street through because it's private, do they have a right to then continue driving on these people's property?
I mean, as a private street, there's no required public right of access. If that other property owner, wanted access, they would have to seek, a reciprocal access agreement or what have you. Because if this property wanted access from Olympic, for example, that's typically how that would be handled, through a private easement agreement. But this street is not, there will not be a public easement for public use or what have you. It's obviously access to the project, but it's a private driveway. It's not intended to be a public street.
So there's a probability we may not get any through access there. And that'll be another one of these super blocks that we're trying to get rid of.
It is possible. However, given we obviously don't have plans. We're simply speculating as to what might occur in the future. But for purposes of servicing the project and what have you, which is what occurred here, is that you need somewhere to have the trash, the transformer room, the
No,
access through
yeah,
garage,
I
that sort of
understand all
thing.
that. They're
That
meeting
would
their
probably
requirement.
drive like having some kind of access that is not an Olympic, because that's per the area plan, that's really not the place that you would, really have access to that project. If that property ever develops in the future, you may see a similar layout as this, in terms of having some kind of side street or created driveway access. But there would be no guarantees that it would punch through.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Commissioner Landris.
Okay, thank you. I have some questions about the CEQA exemption, and I've tried to figure out definitions, so forgive me if I'm asking really basic questions, but I'll do my best to be clear. So the first one actually has to do with cleanup sites. I believe at 1815 Stanford there's a leaking underground tank cleanup site, the John Drescher site. Has that been fully mitigated, that site? Is it gone? It's in the Bergamot Area Plan EIR as an open assessment as of 2010, and it didn't seem to be updated. There was no amendment to it, I think, in 2013, but that's either on the property or abutting the property, and I was just curious about what its status was, particularly if we're going down 5 floors. I couldn't find a reference to it.
That's true. It'll all be gone.
Well, right, except there's this checkbox where there's no explosion risk, so
So you can see it's on page 4 to 5 of the checklist,
okay.
where it speaks to this very issue.
Okay.
With respect to the phase 1 and phase 2 assessments that were prepared. So it does identify that 1815 Stanford Street. However, the project's required to provide us a soils management plan
Okay.
to minimize direct exposure to the diesel impacted soil during redevelopment activities.
Okay.
So,
There we go,
it was
yes.
found that the potential
Right.
exposure would be mitigated to a level of insignificance.
So
And it
the-
is
soils
mitigated
management.
to insignificance?
Yeah.
And there's no risk to the actual, and the tank is gone?
Right.
The actual tank is gone?
Right.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's the former UST, so it's not.
Okay. Next, in terms of, and we can go through the checklist and documentation, I just want to understand we have a no net new PM travel standard, and we're talking about 400 parking spaces on a single site. So what is how should I understand that? How is that not going to generate net new PM travel in that area?
That's, in terms of the checklist, the preconditions for meeting, this is a statutory exemption, and that's not, I will say, that's not one of the
But that's in our
particular
Bergamot area.
considerations, right? But
Okay.
it's not a CEQA issue. However, the no net new trip standard, that is really a citywide goal. It's not a project by project assessment. So, in looking at this project is providing, the allowable parking spaces, or it's meeting the parking requirements of the area plan, which are different than the rest of the city. It's it's sort of like a per square foot, and it is sort of like an overall number that is not. For the rest of the city, it's like kind of by land use, but in the Bergamot area, it's kind of like a per square foot number, and it reduces over time as the number of parking spaces are increased. So that was assessed when the environmental analysis was done for the area plan, that there was sort of like these threshold triggers when parking would reduce, when there was sort of sufficient parking capacity to serve the area plan as a whole, because there are some areas that have no parking.
Right.
And it may be deficient in that way, and there's quite
So
a bit
this
of
could
workspace.
serve
It could, in
other
theory,
areas.
it could, in theory, be parking that is shared, because that's actually what the area plan, does require.
Okay. Is the parking unbundled?
The parking,
Is it unbundled? from the residential and commercial uses?
I don't believe the applicant has specified that it's unbundled.
Okay. Okay. I am not aware that when we did the EIR or the Bergamot area plan that anybody was contemplating 5 subterranean floors, especially when we were talking about excluding below grade floor area from our FAR calculations. Do you feel confident that on 2 levels, that the seismic considerations that were covered by the Bergamot area plan and the seismic considerations addressed by this project, do we feel good about those? Because with people working underground and a lot of cars parked underground, sure, I get that there's no liquefaction, there's an assertion that there's no liquefaction risk, but in a major quake, that's a lot of people underground.
Any new construction would be required to comply with, current building codes. Obviously, seismic requirements would be considered within that. Any new construction would need to meet building code standards, and that's.
And our building codes include 5 stories underground. Do we go that far?
It would
deep
be
in our
assessed
building
as
code?
it would be assessed as part of the plan check process. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Bergamot area EIR also addressed a question of CO2 hotspots, and I'm curious, we're going to have, for 5 floors of subterranean, we're going to have a lot of HVAC going. We're also going to have the vehicles moving in and out quite a lot. Are we confident that that's not going to generate a CO2 hotspot?
No, I mean, again, this is a project that is, the area plan assessed a certain amount of floor area of development and kind of encompassed all of these issues, anticipating certain number of, parking spaces, vehicles, what have you. So this is, covered within that and is also statutorily exempt from CEQA.
I understand I understand the aggregate, but it also addresses the question of specific hotspots, which in the EIR, for the area, it said we don't anticipate hotspots based on, again, I'm asking from a standpoint of a basic understanding here, but is this going to create a hotspot that was not anticipated given the combination of 24-hour HVAC over 5 underground floors and up to 395 vehicles moving around?
I mean, this, although the configuration is, I think is unusual. It's not something that, we had thought, would be kind of a development model that might occur within there when you look at the overall development potential of, floors of residential over office. I mean, it's not an unusual development model in that regard. So whether it's underground or above ground, right? Like the sort of total amount, was accounted for in that analysis. So
Okay.
No, we don't believe there would be.
Okay. And my last question is, were there discussions with the applicant about, I mean, they're coming here for a DR on a Tier 1 project because of the rules that the city set, and we're obliged to follow that process. Given the holding costs of involved in coming here for a DR, and we talked about some of those last week at the Planning and Housing Study Session, were there conversations about Tier 2, about an expanded project that would take up more of the envelope?
There were multiple conversations. As you can see, the case number goes back to 2016.
Yeah.
There were multiple iterations of the project, and at each time it was brought up to the applicant, would you consider Tier 2? And the answer was no.
Okay.
Right. So a Tier 1 project is presented as requested.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a few questions. That speaks to maybe we need to look at Tier 1 and Tier 2. Something's wrong if they find it more financially lucrative to do Tier 1, so I think that kind of reflects on the city, frankly. And that brings me up another question. Tier 1, we don't have the kind of latitude, do we, as we would with the Tier 2 in terms of our development review process? Because I read in the staff report that modulation does not apply to Tier 1. Is that correct? And what does that mean?
Per the Bergamot area plan, the tier 1 projects don't have a modulation requirement. It's applicable once you present or propose a tier 2 or 3 project,
But not tier 1.
but not tier 1. So that's why the building is pretty much at 36 feet
Yeah.
height all the way around.
I get it.
Yeah.
The other question, I think Sean went to it, maybe even had it answered, that basically when the EIR for the Bergamot plan is a program EIR, correct? So it anticipates a certain number of cars, a certain number of housing units, a certain number of everything, and the EIR is based on that. And this project does not bring us close to what those assumptions were, I assume, right?
No, it doesn't. Yeah, and actually the Bergamot, it was actually a consistency checklist, if I remember, because it was pretty close to when the loose was adopted. So it was, consistency with the loose EIR.
And if we ever, God willing, reach the point of the number of units anticipated in the Bergamot plan, then we would relook at the EIR.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the applicant is here and ready for, you have 15 minutes for your presentation.
We do, Michael. Got that. Thank you, Chair, Commission. Good evening. Dave Rand, representing the applicant, WS Communities, from law firm Armbruster, Goldsmith, and Delbeck. I want to make a couple of comments and then save the bulk of our presentation for Michael to take you through the design, hearing the comments and some skepticism about the below grade space. And so I think it's really important that he walk you through that, because we have spent, and this is not hyperbole, years slicing and dicing this property every possible which way from Sunday to try and figure out how to make a project work. To the questions of did we look at tier 2? Yes, we looked at tier 2. Candidly, I was sitting in this room when the Planning Commission at the 11th hour in reviewing the Bergamot area plan decided to take a massive whack at the tier 2 FARs. And a few of us in the back were doing this. No, don't do that. Because when you allow an increment from 1.5 to 1 FAR at tier 1 and then provide only a 0.2 bump up to 1.7 to tier 2, but then you layer on additional requirements ranging from affordable housing obligations to unit mix, mandatory unit mix requirements, all kinds of things that chip away, it makes zero sense. So of course we looked at it. It just wasn't viable. And, we were all here a couple weeks ago when you and the Housing Commission spent a long time talking about getting housing, particularly in this area. We understand that this is not the ideal prototype that some of the folks at the city had envisioned for a project here. It is housing. It is an overwhelmingly housing development project. The stuff that's going on below grade, we're actually excited about because we think it's innovative and it's going to work. And it was specifically that part was specifically contemplated when you guys did the Bergamot area plan. The notion of exempting below grade space to allow for particularly creative uses underground, provided light and air was able to be achieved, which we've spent so much time creating additional openings and moving the courtyards around to make sure that that can happen. That was discussed. That was envisioned. So that isn't something we're coming to you out of left field. In fact, you've approved a project in the Bergamot already with the level of below grade office space. So this is not a matter of first impression for the commission. The residential amenity space, it's going to be just that. It's residential amenity space. It's going to be a combination of typical functions you'd see, probably a gym, but also the idea is to capture space for working, not offices that will be leased, but working for the tenants, conference rooms, communications rooms, workspace. The idea really is to capture live work on one project. That goes to your line of questioning, Commissioner Landris, about reducing trips. We think there's a lot of internal capture possibilities here through that residential amenity space for the residents. And from a broader EIR impact envelope standpoint, this project is so much less intense than was contemplated by the Luce originally for this site, and you've had virtually no development in this area. So the notion of all these impacts that were contemplated on an area-wide basis in the Bergamot, you haven't even scratched the surface. Not to worry. This project is not going to trip you over major thresholds of environmental impacts. I guarantee it. Let that be your problem when more housing projects come forward and the plan is actually realized as it was intended. So with that, I have one more thing to say, forgive me, before I move on. We had a nice conversation before tonight started with the New Road School leadership. some representatives contacted us, and we spent some time going over their very legitimate concerns and interests in terms of being an adjacent neighbor and a sensitive receptor. We have agreed to a handful of construction-related mitigation measures, and I'll summarize them briefly. One is an amendment to, and staff has all the language, to Condition 92 that will require us to involve New Roads in the construction management plan process, take their input and considerations as the construction management plan is developed to make sure that their adjacency is addressed. A requirement to provide them an advanced copy of the soil management plan, given to keep them up to speed and apprised of any environmental remediation that is going to go on that property under the conditions of approval, and also a obligation to provide a 20-foot noise attenuation curtain wall on the shared property line between New Roads School to both visually screen and provide noise buffering from the construction process. But we appreciate them reaching out to us. We intend that to be an ongoing dialogue with New Roads, and we do hope that you adopt those conditions and give them some certainty in that process. And I'm sorry, I've probably not, if I could just maybe give a few more minutes, Chair, for Michael. I went on longer than I should have, and I do not want to leave that short shrift on the design presentation. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Michael.
Good evening, Commissioners. Michael Flonis, architect. I'd like to thank staff for a comprehensive staff report. Where did she go? There she is. First, I would like to walk you through our conceptual position with the project. Given the location of the site in the Bergamot specific plan, I started conceptualizing the project as a neighborhood within the Bergamot community. A neighborhood is a district, especially one forming a community within a town or a city. A neighborhood is an area where people live and interact with one another. Neighborhoods often have fuzzy geographical boundaries, so sometimes it's difficult to tell when one starts and another ends. Major streets often act as logistical boundaries. People usually define a neighborhood by its characteristics. A neighborhood is defined spatially as a special geographic area and functionally as a set of social networks. Neighborhoods then are the spatial units in which face-to-face social interactions occur. The personal setting and situations where residents seek to realize common values, social, and maintain effective social relationships. What's possibly contained in a neighborhood? A residential mix of housing units with amenities, community-oriented ground floor neighborhood serving commercial, opportunities for public interaction, both residents, office, and commercial workers, and of course, neighbors, creative office space with support services, public open space as well as private open space, and public transportation. It's a perfect site. It's got all of these kind of characteristics and qualities. What you see in this image is Nebraska between Stanford and Berkeley Avenue. And to think about this as the beginnings of something else which is going to transform this Nebraska over a period of time. Part of what a neighborhood contains is the potential for a pocket park or plaza space for people to move and operate within that environment. We purposely separated the buildings so we could get visual access to the interior of the project, both the housing on grade and above grade, and also make visual connections to below grade and allow the neighbors, allow visitors to be welcomed into those spaces. And there's two of those spaces along Nebraska and one along Berkeley on the east side of the property. So here you see the rendering, and in the lower right-hand corner you can see where that rendering is being seen from. Stanford on the right and Nebraska along the frontage. This is the larger of the two openings where the pocket park would exist. As we move a little farther east, you're starting to see the opening in the building and what's potentially visually inviting, both for guests looking for perhaps the deli, perhaps they're looking for someone who works in the creative office space on the C1 or C2 level, or a neighbor who's looking for a friend that lives in the residential portion of the project. And here we are looking a bit east at that same location. And this is the secondary opening within the building. The landscaping is important in this area, and opportunities for people to sit, meet, congregate, socialize, and we can imagine perhaps a restaurant or two in this location. The lobby for the rental office, both for the below grade and the above grade, is situated in this area as well. So here we are on the corner of Berkeley and Nebraska. The building, the residential building rises above, which allows a kind of portal into this this space to the south as we walk south along Berkeley. Here's the other entry pedestrian entry into the project at this location, just a bit south of Nebraska. This is looking into that space and what the kind of character and quality of that space might be like. And so what you're seeing here is the first floor plan, and now we move in from that side entry on Berkeley, and you're on the ground floor plane here. The second level below, and now we're looking into that space below. We're one level below grade, and I have to admit I've showed these images to a number of individuals, not just in my office but outside the office, and they have a hard time trying to locate themselves. Is this below grade? Is this on grade? Is this two levels below? Is it above grade? Because I think what we were able to accomplish in this particular scheme was the distances between these residential buildings, which opened up the building for light, ventilation, and visual interest as well. And here we are one level below, the walkways. And then finally the C2 level, which is looked at as a landscape plaza, both for the residential amenities as well as the creative office space. We work very closely with the landscape architect in developing along, as I said earlier, developing the space along Nebraska, and some of the things that we have thought about in these spaces The amenity spaces for residences is, now remember, we have two levels, so we don't want to put everything on one level and kind of split and open it up and split it up a bit. So the possibility of some smaller gyms, perhaps a community room, a large community room on each level, perhaps two smaller community rooms, one each on each level. Residential storage. We hear a lot of complaints with residences that there isn't enough storage in some of these units, and so sometimes they turn a parking space into storage space. So if they had, if the storage spaces were 10 by 10, which are quite small, that constitutes 18,000 square feet of this amenity space. So that could be thought about. Probably two business centers, a conference room, perhaps a larger conference room on each level, and maybe two smaller ones. Utility and mechanical space. We're looking at what we think we're going to need below grade for utility space. Lounges, a business center, perhaps two screening rooms for private, small private screenings for residences, private meeting rooms, restrooms. So it will fill up quite quickly. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to have a talk with him later.
Get a question.
Yeah,
What else
please.
did you want to say?
So, and some of the other various passive, well, let me talk first about, or quickly about, this is another view of the below grade space, the C2 level. And some of the other open spaces, walkways that are open at the various levels, so you can really begin to see that this has it's quite open to the sky, and a great feeling in terms of that. In terms of the roof, we have what has been in a preliminary design sense. We've got a yoga deck, a fire pit lounge, a cinema lounge, a children's play area, some observation decks sprinkled throughout the upper levels, table sports lounge, small quiet deck spaces, and an herbal garden for residences. What I do have, and these are some images that we might see on the ground floor level, on grade, and maybe above a yoga deck on the roof. And the cinema in the upper right-hand corner. What we did, because we thought it was important, was to try to compare what we had originally, which is the drawing that you see on the upper left-hand corner. That was the original drawing. The total area open to the sky is about 10,900 square feet. The current plan that we have, which is in the upper right-hand corner, is we've opened it up to over 16,700 square feet of open space. So the openness to the sky has grown quite considerably. The below grade, we've got a total of about 7,500 square feet that's open to the sky, and the new scheme is about 8,600 square feet. So in all conditions, they have grown. And I think the last point that I'd like to make, if I may have a minute or two, we're comparing this project, the openness of this project, against some projects that we've already, one is under construction right now. It's the Millennium East Village, which is in the lower right-hand corner. That project is got a ground floor courtyard, which is about 250 feet in length and averages about anywhere from 9 to 40 feet in width. And you can see the 140-foot spot there, which is quite large. Versus a project on 5th Street, which has got a number. You can see the number. You can see the numbers here on the lower left-hand corner. The number one space that's open is 13 by 22. The number 2 space is 14 by 27. The number 3 space is 17 by 36. The 4th space is 10 by 30. And the 5th location is 24 by 5. So I think in comparison, and these are projects that have come through this commission. One is, as I said, is being built, and it's probably about 3 months from completion. The other one has gone through all the entitlement processes. So to even think that the below grade space is not going to be friendly space, usable space, quality space, I think is incorrect. Thank you.
Yeah, I have some clarifying questions. First of all, it's you actually have entered into the area of naval architecture here. You're building an ocean liner where there's as much above the water line as below the water line. So it's quite an impressive project. I'm asking about the thickness of the floor planes below grade. There seems to be a great deal of variation. Your first 2 floors have exceptionally thick floors, and then the parking has very thin floors. Is there something going on there that is unique?
No, those floors will probably be somewhere between 14 and 16 inch thick concrete decks.
I'm talking about the first 2 lower levels, the ceilings of the first 2 lower levels.
They are.
Because they look like they're about 5 feet thick and 3
What's
feet.
what? I'm not following.
A41.
What's 5 feet thick?
Well, I'm looking at page A41.
Let me get it. So you're looking at the section.
Right.
The a lot of that post shade stuff is proposed mechanical equipment that we've got to get down into that space and service some of those spaces. We don't know exactly how deep it's going to be because we don't have the mechanical engineer on board, or the electrical engineer on board, or the plumbing engineer on board.
I see. And how deep are your tree wells then in that area of the lower courtyard, let's say?
They go into the garage, so they'll be the depth of the garage floor. They'll probably be 9 feet deep.
Really?
We do that in. I think you've seen this before from us, where we're doing on a podium deck where we're leaving a tree well because we know a tree needs some space to grow and the ball to grow, and so we take that into consideration and make sure that we have that adequate space and work with the landscape architect on that. I'm sorry? Yeah, it doesn't make sense not to run that well down and occupy a parking space in the garage. To hold it up is more work than to just set it down on the slab of the parking garage below.
No, that's it for now.
Thank you for the presentation and the design. It's a very nice design, as to be expected.
Thank you.
So I just have a few questions. You have, as Mr. Rand alluded to, and your thoughts alluded to, you guys put a lot of thought into this project over the last few years. Why aren't we seeing the amenity spaces below grade built? I mean, not built out, but designed out. I mean, and I'm going to preface this by saying, when my work, from what I understand, the subterranean the storage is a fantastic use for the residents. but it just doesn't make sense to me why I'm just seeing blank shell and core there. This isn't office space as far as I can tell.
No,
So
it's not office space at all. This is schematic design phase. So once we get into the design development phase, that sort of programming of those spaces will take place. We thought it was a little premature to do anything now, but certainly we knew where the spaces were effectively going. I mean, it's also possible that some of the spaces may shift and move and change, and where we have creative office space, we may trade some of that off for amenity space and move things around. Thinking about the relationships between some of these spaces, it just seemed to make more sense to hold off on that until we get into the design development phase.
If I could add one other thing to that, all true. The focus of our process largely with the planning staff, with the ARB, and with the internal team has been these courtyard spaces. There has been more push and pull and manipulation and modification of these courtyards, which obviously affects what's going on in the below grade spaces. So there was a sense that programming them very specifically didn't make a ton of sense, as this was largely a moving target up until this point, but we've landed on a plan that we think works, and we've described, I think, the intended use and amenity space for those areas.
okay. Seems like it should, especially since you guys are so far along, it should be designed, or at least in my mind. Where I wasn't on the commission when we approved a project that had below grade office. Has that been built?
No, it's entitled, it's in permit, it's received ARB approval.
It's in plan check.
It's in plan check.
So
it's right next to the Millennium Village project.
Just to the east.
Yeah.
And can you point me to a project locally where I could see subterranean office? Because I know you guys have a comfort level with this, but it seems a little awkward to me. A little bit.
We talked about that. We don't know that of a built out space that actually exists in Santa Monica. Do you? No. But sorry. Yeah. But it may be different, but it was contemplated when the Bergamot plan was adopted. This was the idea.
I'm not saying it's a bad.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I say it's a little odd, and I'm wondering if you have.
Yeah. I mean, it's an innovative project.
If I can jump in there, staff is aware of, there are some examples in the city, primarily actually around medical office buildings. I know for sure there's a couple of buildings on Santa Monica Boulevard near Colorado that have subterranean medical office where, x-ray room or MRI or what have you, that occurs actually underground. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think now you say doctor's office.
Yeah, that's actually a more common thing that we've seen.
Okay.
If I may follow up with Dave's answer. This project went before ARB, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago. They wanted to put it on consent.
No,
but
you're talking about the other one, not this one.
No, I'm not talking about this one. I'm talking about the other one that's on Stanford. They wanted to put it on consent, and there was one condition that they didn't like, that they wanted us to work with staff on one piece of the building, and the ARB members they thought the building was fine without doing that, so they had to put it back. They couldn't take it they couldn't put it on consent because they wanted to remove the condition. They removed the condition, and then there was a vote of 7-0 quickly. So I think if a number of architects have looked at this thing pretty carefully, I think in everybody's mind, these things will work. You can't put retail down there. Retail below grade, we know historically, because we've seen it in New York and a lot of other places, it doesn't work. But office space works, and other kinds of spaces like that. If you have we have some.
You've done.
Okay.
You've done.
Thank you.
You're good. Thank you. So then I have a couple questions about pages on drawings, and I think maybe the most substantive one I have is on the Abe drawings that show the roof decks, which I love the roof decks. I think it's a great amenity. The community gardens is fantastic. I've seen those in some of my projects, and I know how well used they are. But
What page are you on?
It doesn't have a page number because it's actually roof level plan of the Ave landscape plans. And I'm just looking down in the bottom right of it where there's a table sport lounge along the next to Berkeley. In most of these areas, you've done a really nice job of putting planters along the edges of the building so that people don't have a direct look from the rooftop straight down. This is the one area where you don't really have that, and I'm wondering if that's something that can be accommodated, a roof planter in that area.
Yeah, I think this is Calvin's not here to defend himself, but I would say this is, in my mind, this is a preliminary design, and this will get really developed. We've worked with him on a number of projects, and this is sort of how it starts off with a set of ideas, and then they develop and they change and they evolve. And
he does fantastic art stuff.
He does great work.
I absolutely agree. I'm just wanting to highlight that it would be more palatable for me if there was a planter along there.
So noted.
Hold on. There's a lot of pages in this. But I had one other comment for you because there was something else I was having trouble with one of Calvin's drawings. And I think it's just because of the iterations that you've gone through. But this would be his C2 level connection diagram. And I think this is more just of an FYI. I think you have an old floor plate there on that diagram. C2 level connection diagram. Because it's really showing all office space and none of that amenity space that we've talked about.
You're right.
So
that
needs to be
it's
fixed
diagrammatically, it's to try to show how we see the availability for visitors and guests and other people to be able to look down and see that space and move down into that space. And you're right.
Right. So we just need to correct that since we're being told it's residential area. Getting back to the other comment I had, if by ARB that you guys got to ARB, do you think you would have those amenity spaces more fleshed out at that point?
Yes.
Okay. Then on your sheet A23. In the middle of basically in the middle of the diagram, which I believe is an open area, it says covered 2307. Is that just a typo? Should that be uncovered 2307?
It's covering part of the below grade space. It's kind of a platform because what we had perceived is that space that's adjacent to it might be like a small gym that they would have yoga, and they could open up doors and be able to sort of spill out onto that space a bit. And then the other area there, the larger area below where it says covered, would be tables and chairs, because we're proposing a small cafe and a coffee shop, a cafe and deli and a coffee shop down there, which would serve not only serve the residents, but also serve the office space.
It just doesn't seem right. When I go back and forth between 23 and 24, there's two areas that are called covered, but I don't know, it seems to me that one of them's wrong. Then you also have, there was another thing I saw which was kind of interesting. Along some of your corridors, you had some little seating areas for the residents.
Yes.
Which again, another unique aspect to the project. Are those areas counting towards common areas for the residents or open space areas for the residents, or is that just
I don't think we calculated them as that way. And by the way, the other thing that we try to achieve with all these projects is as little double-loaded corridor space as possible. We're roughly a little over half single-loaded corridor versus double-loaded corridor. That way we can get light and ventilation into both sides of a unit. Sustainably, from a sustainable aspect, it's better. less mechanical systems.
Yeah, no, they're always, it's always, I think, preferable to have the single loaded corridors. Not
Yes.
always done, because it's more expensive.
When we do single loaded corridors, we leave them open ended, so we're not mechanically conditioning those spaces as well.
Great. And then I think my other questions probably go to, well, I'll ask you this first, and I think Mr. Rand already probably hit the nail on with the hammer. But to get you to a tier 1, is it really just the FAR issue, or is it the combination? I mean, there could be a give on either more FAR, or we got to take away some of the ornaments. But is there any one thing other than FAR that was really problematic that kept you guys going from tier 2?
Mr. Rand could answer that question, and I have a little piece that I'd like to add to that.
Yeah, please, absolutely. Because this is something we're going to struggle with. We do not want tier 1 projects.
It's really, it's a combination is the answer, because the idea originally was of the tiered system is you'd provide an incentive, an inducement to jump up. And with that inducement came obligations. And the way the plan is currently structured in the mixed-use creative area today, there are plenty of additional obligations. There's no inducement. There's no benefit. So you're out of whack. It's the affordable housing. It's the mandatory unit mix, which everybody overlooks, but is actually a huge deal when you factor in 20% 3 bedrooms, 15% 3 bedrooms, 20% 2 bedrooms. That creates all kinds of programmatic issues, net rentable square footage issues. So it just doesn't make sense. I mean, if there was more FAR to
justify it,
then sure, but it doesn't exist.
Okay, I just want to make sure we try to flesh those things out tonight, because my sense is we're going to have to grapple with this in the near future. So appreciate that. But Mr. Flonis, we had another.
I'm not going to take any more of your
I'm sorry. Then, if Mr. Rand could come back, then I have a couple questions to him, and I'm sorry, I will not usurp the mic much longer. How this kind of categorical exemption related questions for you is to meet the 5%, you're paying a fee for a portion of that.
No. So originally, we were providing 9 affordable, extremely low income, 2-bedroom units. And there's 2 standards, right? There is what we need to do to meet the AHPP under tier 1,
right, and
what we need to do to qualify for the transit priority project statutory exemption.
And that's the one I'm most focused on right
now. So for that, we were providing originally 9 units, which equated to 4.92% of the total units. The CEQA statute has no rounding convention. 4.992, it's logical that would be rounded up to 5. Mr. Raskin raised an objection to that. We don't think that additional unit is legally obligated to meet the CEQA exemption criteria. That said, to take any ambiguity off the table, we volunteered the additional 10th unit to make sure we are pushed above 5%. So there's no fractional issue any longer. We're doing 5% to qualify for the CEQA exemption. And that consists of 9 extremely low income units and 1 very low income unit. The CEQA exemption criteria is 5% very low. So we're exceeding the affordable requirements now required under the CEQA exemption. The fee out issue, I'll stop there if you don't want me to.
No, I'm pretty sure you just addressed my concern. I was choking a little bit on the 4.9%, thinking that was at very low income, but that's extremely low. So then the other one you're offering is low, which then kicks
very low. Very low.
I am comfortable with that.
Yeah.
My next question is CEQA exemptions. Seems to me we shouldn't be talking about things in terms of mitigations with CEQA exemptions. We should be talking about them as regulatory compliance measures or project design features. Is that
That is true as a general proposition. There is an appellate court decision, though, that came out last year from San Francisco that helps resolve this. And in that case, there was a categorical exemption, not a statutory exemption. The Planning Commission on a CUP imposed some construction mitigations or measures, and the project was sued. Someone argued, no, that's mitigation. You've mitigated your way out of an exemption. You can't do that. The court said the city had the authority under its permitting to address those through conditions. They didn't have to necessarily be CEQA mitigation measures.
Right.
They're permitting condition obligations, which is fair game. So I would put the category of conditions that we worked out with New Road School into that category. They're obligations that are the city's imposing through its permitting authority.
And the same thing with the tank is a kind of a regulatory compliance measure. That's something you need to do to.
Exactly right. That is truly a regulatory compliance measure required by the fire department. There's that the tank's actually been removed, and there's been a closure report issued by the fire department. But as a follow-up to that, the regulatory agency requires a soil management plan, and that has been embedded as a condition of approval. But that really truly is a regulatory compliance obligation, not a mitigation measure.
Okay, and then I'm believing this is my last question at this moment, which is, you're going to dig 5 levels of any soil that was potentially contaminated is going to be shipped off to some other. I mean, do you know how deep the contamination was? I guess.
Yeah, there's obviously no way it runs anywhere near that deep. We actually don't think there's going to be contamination. The recent phase 2 soil borings came up clean. The soil management plan is a protective sort of belt and suspenders measure, and that obligation requires there to be a environmental remediation expert on site during excavation to oversee the contaminated areas and make sure that any stuff that's found in the soil is properly removed and disposed of off-site. And then, yeah, at a certain point, pretty quickly, we're going to be out of any risk zone. But it's all covered by the existing regulatory compliance measures, conditions of approval.
Okay, and then the last thing is a statement. It wasn't a question, so I wasn't lying. Is that going back to that residential amenity space underground? One of the things that I heard contemplated, 2 things I heard contemplated were utilities and mechanical. That's not going to end up as being residential floor area. So you better, we got to stay away from those uses. So those were things that you had highlighted as potentials.
Yeah, no, and the staff has addressed this fully because we have to record, there's a condition of approval obligating us to record a covenant against the property, specifying that those spaces called out as residential amenity or storage spaces have to be used for residential use for the life of the project. So not only is it a condition of approval, it's a deed restriction obligation. So they have held our feet to the fire.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rand. I just want to verify that the project-specific conditions in the revised STOA are all good.
Yes, sir.
Including number 4 and number 5, which are having to do with corporate housing and lodging and case management and or support services for the households.
Yep.
That's great. And then I'm curious, looking at our RENA numbers. So the requirement, the transit CEQA exemption says 5% for very low or extremely low.
It actually says 5% of very low, but
very low,
extremely low,
right? Is
and a deeper
incorporated.
affordability level would
Right.
obviously qualify. Yeah.
Exactly. And if just because we're studying this, I'm curious. What would it have taken for you to have opted for low or moderate in a project like this?
It would be a non-starter.
It would be a
Because
non-starter.
The low income obligation is 20%. Commissioner, the moderate is 100%.
Right.
So that's
a non-starter.
Right. They're frankly both non-starters.
Okay. All right. Because it strikes me that this is a neighborhood where those income levels, right, low and moderate, it'd be very interesting to look at housing models. This is now potentially lost to that because of the way that the city policy is designing the tiering and the incentives. I'm with you there. But that having been said, you alluded in your statement to, both you and Mr. Falonis alluded to this notion that these amenities, the residential amenities, could include some community building spaces, community rooms, but also you have a whole vocabulary of connection here. And we heard in the staff report that the substantial parking production could also have some neighborhood serving potential. Would you, and this is total speculation, but listening to what you said, consider voluntarily making some of these community rooms available to the neighborhood as on a volunteer basis for some form of access.
I don't think we're prepared to do that right now, Commissioner. Okay. The space, first of all, spaces, we need to devise them. Yeah.
You need that for the city plan for the Housing Accountability Act, right? So they need to be unit specific, residential specific to the project.
Oh, all of the residential amenity spaces have to be assigned to residents. I thought these. So
no,
how
no,
would
no,
you?
No. They need to be residential amenity spaces.
Right.
Right. So they don't need to be assigned to specific residents, but they need to be a residential use, which would include an amenity space. That's not to say it couldn't be a shared use, it can be a conference room that we allow neighborhood groups to use from time to time.
That's what I'm pointing to.
And that's something we can.
What I'm pointing to. Not dedicated. We're not going to agree to that as a condition tonight, but the point is noted. Okay. I mean, I think that would be, to the extent that you're doing neighborhood facing, you're thinking about the neighborhood, I think that would be a benefit, and I would encourage you, as you develop the community rooms, to think about locating them in ways that if neighbors were inviting people in from the community to use those spaces, they could access them without having to go through locked private access areas, right? That you have that flexibility. And the other observation related to that point is, I love all the bike parking. I don't love that the bike parking is way, way, way down. And I just want to throw that out there. Mm-hmm. But to the extent that you're talking about making storage available on a resident by resident basis, even with the 10 by 10 storage, mm-hmm. there are people who are increasingly interested in dedicated locked bike lock that is 360 degrees of lock, and so that might be a resident friendly use for some of that storage.
Agreed.
Higher up than the very low, the win-win for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
I was also very concerned about those bikes in the core of the earth and never making it out. I feel like it has to be close enough to ground level that you could ride out. You shouldn't have to take an elevator to take your bike, or a lot of times they just won't get used. So that to me would be pretty important. But what is very important to me and extremely troubling is this whole Berkeley Street extension thing that's not happening.
Yeah.
And that to me is the biggest heartbreak of all. And it seems to me like even in the findings, it gets a little dicey for me. I see the attorney perking up. But, we say many times in the findings that this is an underutilized parcel but it's zoned for more intensive use according to the Bergamot Area Plan. But the Bergamot Area Plan also says that for that intensive use, we should be adding these streets. So aren't we actually creating an access issue, even for public safety, where it can only reach this many people and these many users from one side, that they're still blocked off from that other side? Shouldn't making that through road be a really important priority?
Well, I think we have addressed the access issues. I think it's not an access concern. If you're asking about the complete street concept that was going to be deeded to the city as community benefits, that was the intent of the plan, but it was very clear that those were going to be contemplated and taken through the development agreement process as community benefits. The city doesn't have the legal ability to require that through a development permit on a Tier 1 project. So we are addressing the access and the circulation, and we've spent a lot of time with mobility to get everybody comfortable that we won't have vehicular pedestrian kind of conflicts through the private drives that are being created. But the full-blown Bergamot streets, this is not a Tier 3 project, and the Tier 3 development agreement process didn't work. Just ask Hines, and so it's just not an issue. Michael reminded me we actually started. I don't even know if this is worth saying, but we started from the premise that we were going to voluntarily give all the streets. Okay, we came in with a plan that did all that, and gave it up voluntarily, and we got a lot of pushback by a lot of different parties that in doing that, our project was too massive and we didn't have enough openings and we needed more push-pulls and we needed more space on Nebraska and public plaza area. And so, look, the only way to make it work, to both open it up and address those concerns, was to occupy a portion of those fuller streets and reduce them to private drives. So when I said we looked at this every which way, we truly did, including that way. And actually that was our starting premise, but it proved that it kind of died on the vine for other reasons. And so we think the plan before you is the best compromise, given the conditions that we're dealing with under the plan, to make it work.
It's a heartbreak. So how many units would you have to move around to add that street in? Like, what do you really lose by that street?
Well, it would, you want to, I mean, it would, I mean, to keep the openings that we were, so forcefully pushed to do, and to create the light and air that we've created, and the plaza area, to then reoccupy those streets, or to pull the project. Yeah, we would lose units. I'll let you describe how many, but there's no way we wouldn't. This thing's not working.
I know we can't. I'm just curious. I just need to know.
If I can get to the drawing, I'll show you. One more. It's not just about moving units, it's about losing units. Because first of all, the street's not wide enough, as you see Berkeley there now, so it would have to get wider. In order to get wider, the ramp would have to move deeper into the space, into the property, so we'd lose 3 or 4 units right there. Then as you move the transformer in and the solid waste in, we start losing more units. We start losing square footage of the ground floor commercial on the corner of Berkeley and Nebraska as well.
So it cuts that far in.
And then as we do that, then the openings to the sky starts to get pinched, and we're right back to where we were in the beginning. So we actually even looked at a scheme where we spanned the street up above with units and came out and spanned the street. But we got pushback from solid waste because these big trucks come in and they pick up these big dumpsters and they need a lot of overhead space. And all we really gained was moving like 4 units or something. And it made no sense to do that.
I just want to add one last point. It's not like we didn't make some concessions. We've lost units through the process thus far. We reduced units. We started at close to 200, and we had 190. We're down to 183. So we've shaved off in order to try and meet the feedback that we've received. But
Yeah, we started at 200.
yeah.
It's just really hard to let go of that. Once you dig 5 stories underground and pour all that cement, that street's never going to happen. It's just not. Well, I wasn't on.
This is just following up on Commissioner Fresco's question. There's an email that came out today from the city regarding the proposed changes in the area, particularly related to Nebraska. And there is I'm trying to pull it up here right now. There's a proposal essentially to bollard out a portion of the intersection of Nebraska and Stewart for bike and pedestrian safety. I think it is consistent with what you're imagining in terms of the potential public pocket park on Nebraska, but I just wanted to make sure that we're not creating a design traffic jam, and that may also be a question for staff. But from your perspective, it's a little further southwest of the project, but have you been involved in those conversations?
We haven't, but the reality is when we get into construction docs, we have to go into extensive discussions with mobility. That will all come up as part of the review during that process. So
Okay.
We will get there. We haven't yet.
Okay, the basis for the proposed change is concern about street safety and cars making a right turn from Stewart onto Nebraska. Because it's so wide at that point, it creates confusion and it creates a substantial risk for car versus bike or car versus pedestrian. And so the idea of creating a pocket park and bollarding out that turn is to narrow the options, narrow the turning radius choices, and but given the traffic volumes and the fact that we are not providing another exit onto Olympic, I just wanted to raise that.
No, I appreciate that, and we'd welcome a specific condition for mobility to focus on that if it's,
Okay.
if that's of interest.
Yeah, I would like to make sure that we preserve bike and pedestrian safety at that intersection. I don't know how you would.
So that improvement's happening at the intersection of Pennsylvania, Nebraska, Stewart, and Olympic. I mean, as you're aware, like the geometry of the streets there are weird. It's triangles and like 4-point legs or what have you. So that's meant to like try and square that off for a safety perspective. This project is actually like quite a bit away from that improvement. It's mid-block. So they are designing it to what's required in the Bergerman area plan in terms of Nebraska being a pedestrian priority corridor, a retail priority corridor, encompassing, so this is like the beginning of an implementation of that vision, for this portion of the block, quite separate from that project. This is what I mean is it's quite a distance from that project.
I
So this is
understand,
not
but it's still 400, potentially 400 vehicles. Ideally, also 264 bikes, which would be great.
Yeah.
What I think it sounds like what you're saying you're open to is a condition that would essentially attend to the safety and mobility issues at the what I'm concerned about is when we make that change, which will come online before this project is ultimately built, if we think about timeline. Maybe one can hope that now then we add 400 vehicles to the street and people say, oh wait, I don't know. I want to make sure that we are baking in that bikeway safety as the priority, and that whatever has to happen on their end to make sure that traffic is, that traffic flow is safe. That's on them, not on us.
Right. The
That's
project
where
will go through a circulation of, it already has extensively, actually. In terms of the fact that there's, parking, if there's redevelopment on the block, there's going to be subterranean parking and, redevelopment, what have you. And each project will be required, to implement the requirements of the area plan with respect to what's happening on Nebraska, to the extent that there are barely any sidewalks, no bike lanes. It's a very wide street. There's a lot of, but this is the iterative process of that street turning over, given the fact that there's, the city does not own all the land or anything like that, right? We're opportunistic with those things. So, I'm not sure that a condition is necessary, since these are like adopted policy documents and requirements anyways.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's on. It's not. It's defined as residential use, and so it's always been residential amenities have always been considered a residential use, right?
Bergamot plan, correct? Everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So that's important to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Great.
We may have found a solution for Okay, we actually have two public speakers, or two people of the public, members of the public who want to speak, and after that we're going to take a break. But I'll give you a chance to speak first. Ellis Raskin, followed by Emily Alexander.
Good evening, Commissioners. So yeah, I came here tonight to talk about the Transit Priority Project inclusionary housing requirements. And I'm really encouraged to hear from Mr. Rand that the developer is going to move forward with the 10th affordable unit. So I sent you an email about this, but to qualify for a secret exemption to the Transit Priority Project, you have to have at least, under this standard, 5% of the units set aside for very affordable very affordable units. So that said, CEQA does not allow for rounding. These requirements under the Transit Priority Project are strict requirements that can't be satisfied through fractional units. Here I would simply ask that you add as a condition of approval the provision of those 10 affordable units and explicitly make that part of the conditions of approval for this project moving forward. I think we're all excited to see these units come online as quickly as possible, but if we're all going to be realistic about preserving economic diversity in the city, it's also important to ensure that these projects are meeting their affordable housing and inclusionary housing requirements. So that said, just please add that condition of approval for 10 affordable units, and thank you for your work.
The next speaker is Emily Alexander.
Hi, my name's Emily Alexander, and I'm here as a representative of New Road School, located at 3131 Olympic Boulevard. Our land actually goes all the way back to Nebraska, so we are the portion of land that is directly east of the project that we've been talking about. And I just wanted to put on the record our appreciation of the applicant to meet with us and discuss our concerns concerning the nature of this construction, which will be significant. Our school is K through 12. Most of our kids, for example, eat lunch outside every day. Our high school, to get from class to class, you are outside. Obviously, our younger kids have a dedicated play space, as does our middle school. So these circumstances are going to clearly impact us, and we want to make sure that the best thing happens for our kids. So just to say that the applicant has agreed to the sound wall, which we very much appreciate, and also to show us a draft of their construction mitigation plan and allow us to comment. So I just wanted to say thank you to them, and also just thank you for your work. It's been very interesting watching your process and your dedication to this commission.
Thank you. Is there a question? Mario, do you have a question? Mario, excuse me, one of our commissioners has a question.
Were you given any representation how long this project's going to take?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, unless we are going to speed through the discussion, which based on the past, I think unlikely. You think? We can speed through it? Because I really have to go, okay. Okay, let's take a, I don't want to go into detail, but even though I just did.
Doing what the plan says. What is it?
team. Let's go. Let's go.
Chair, get in your seat. Sean?
I just first want to say that I think it's interesting that we're discussing this project tonight, given that Ray Cappy, who was one of the fathers of SCI-Arc, just died a week or two ago. So it's kind of interesting coincidence. Okay, it's before the commission. Discussion.
I would like to second that because SCI-Arc is actually a very important institution.
Yes.
Both in the regional history, but in the generations of architects that have come through there.
Absolutely.
And it feels like we're like eating our children to tear down that building. So,
but they have a much nicer one downtown now.
I know.
Okay, anyone want to say anything?
Okay. I just can't get over not getting that street, but I'm not going to get it, so I'm going to let it go, but I'm not happy about it. So there. No.
No, she'll never let
Never.
anything go.
I don't, and I never forget either.
We're on the Frozen 2, so let it go.
But I would like, I think it probably wouldn't be too miserable for these guys, but I would like to have that bike storage moved up to C1. I think that is really critical to our goals of actually getting people to use all those bikes. So there's that. I support the the project-specific conditions that staff put in there already, so I don't have anything else to add. I was wondering if we could possibly add, it's at the Bergamot area plan has a 42-inch fence requirement, but I think considering what we're trying to do there, no fence is much, much better.
Was there a fence proposed?
No, but it could happen in the future. Does that upset you to have no fence? That's okay. No, I'm talking about in the future for pedestrians to not have to walk by fences and be cut off from spaces. Cool. Okay. And I guess that was really it, except for that street. So I would make a motion that would approve this project with those 2 extra conditions.
Is there a second?
I'll second it if you'll take one more. I understand from Jing, I do understand your point about it being unnecessary to add a condition, but I'm looking at the mobility division section of the report, and since the, unless there's somewhere else I should be looking, since the applicant has offered, I would like to add a condition that there be active consultation with mobility relative to the bike action plan and the pedestrian action plan for the Bergamot area.
Okay. Is there further discussion?
Yes.
If that's friendly.
That's fine.
Okay.
Commissioner Reese.
So I will have a couple of hopefully friendly amendments. I'd like to see a condition that conditions the 9-foot tree wells. I would like to see a condition that includes the new roads, project design features, or regulatory compliance measures.
They're in the revised.
Would it be okay, actually, if we could run through some of the staff red lines? Just it may address some of the
Oh, there's more than just that one thing in the staff red line?
Yeah, you have the revised before you, and then the applicant had provided us some of their written suggestions with respect to new roads, and Grace can maybe just go through those just so you see what we're proposing. Yeah, just so you can see the exact language. So go ahead, Grace.
Here, I got it.
Thank you. So we'll start with the revised set that you had related to the affordable units. That's the number 6 in red before you. We'll scroll down.
Can we just, I'm sorry.
Can we pause on that condition just to go back? Just to
Yeah,
run
can we
through
just
it?
clarify for the record, for AHPP, for the purposes of AHPP, 9 units are required.
That is correct.
For the purposes of the transit CEQA exemption, something else is required, and it's being satisfied by the additional unit.
No,
The
that is
additional
not
low
correct.
unit.
No.
No?
No.
Did I just say that opposite?
Yeah, no. The applicant complied with the AHPP and with CEQA. So what you received in the email was only a portion of that provision. In 21155.1, which is the transit priority project exemption, it actually provides options, in terms of how a project could comply. So it has to meet one of the following, one of which is providing those units, 5% of units on site at very low income. There is another option that an applicant could pay a fee equivalent to that required unit, because the city's ordinance requires that fractional unit. That's how the applicant is getting whole, in terms of the 5%. So it is, the city's position, the staff's position when we reviewed this, that the project was fully compliant with the exemption, with the 9 units and the payment of the 0.15 fractional unit. So that, that the applicant, though, as you've seen, has volunteered up this extra unit. So this condition is written such that 9 units is required, and there is a voluntary extra 1-bedroom unit that is being offered up that is not required by the AHPP or for the CEQA exemption. And so that's why this condition is being added to ensure that that extra 1-bedroom unit at very low income, affordable to 50% income households, complies with all aspects of the AHPP, because that's really important in terms of tenant selection, income and rent limitations, et cetera. However, the one provision that the applicant is not volunteering is with respect to minimum unit size and the type of the unit, because under the AHPP, if you have an affordable unit, it has to be all 2 bedrooms. Because this is voluntary, they're offering it at 1 bedroom, and at the size of the unit be no smaller than a comparable 1-bedroom market rate units in the project. Okay. So that's what's in there.
Well, I am.
Wait, she has
Oh, I'm
other
sorry.
changes.
Oh, I'm. Should have had some.
There's a slight revision to condition number 13 listed here. There's an incorrect date of plans that was mentioned in the drafted STOA. So the current and most recent version is dated November 25th, corrected there. We also have as it relates to the construction management plan, applicant shall provide New Roads School with the name and contact information for the qualified environmental consultant or consultants hired to prepare the soils management plan prior to its submission of the SMP to the reviewing agencies, and said consultant shall be present during grading and excavation in the known or suspected locations of contaminated soils. We'll make that edit. I think we strike that. We said prior to twice, but I read it into the record correctly.
I'm sorry. That says it gives them their name and contact information, but it also should probably say something about the environmental consultant being given permission to speak to New Roads, because they could. I mean, if we're writing a condition, it should.
Well, that's up to them.
Yeah. Right.
I like where you're heading with that. They engage with it.
That's right. I understand the agreement to be engaging with that consultant and being able to offer. Ms. Alexander said that they appreciated the offer to be informed and to speak with that consultant. That doesn't say that. So I just just want to make sure we're consistent with what the agreement was.
Okay.
And then, wasn't there a 20-foot sound wall? Or
Yes,
are we getting
it
into that?
goes-
We're getting into that?
Condition number 40. I'll read the language in red. Before commencement of construction, the applicant shall, at its expense, install a sound attenuation barrier at least 20 feet in height from grade level, provided such barrier is permitted with the zoning ordinance, along the entire property line shared with New Road School, unless the school notifies the applicant in writing that no such barrier is requested. Such barrier shall remain in place until all exterior construction work is completed, unless the school mutually agrees to temporary modifications for construction needs. During construction, applicant shall update the construction management plan to notify the city of changes to mutual agreements with the school with respect to the sound attenuation barrier.
Any others?
Is that satisfactory to New Roads? Has that been worked out with the, okay.
I believe that is the last of the, oh, there's one more? 91.
Are you trying to speak?
Okay, and lastly, in red, at least 30 days before submitting its proposed construction period mitigation plan to the city, the applicant will provide a copy of its draft construction period mitigation plan to the head of school at New Roads School and solicit the school's input. The applicant shall provide written documentation of comments received from New Roads School and how comments have been addressed when the proposed construction period mitigation plan is submitted to the city. So that way the city has documentation that consultation occurred and what those comments are compiled back to
Right.
staff.
Great.
Could we add and solicit the school's input to the soils one? Since it's just draft language that's available.
Input to the soils, what?
Well, it's name and
Everything.
contact information, so, okay.
Yeah, I don't think we need that.
I don't, no, that's good. It's all good.
Okay, so I was in the midst of trying to put in some
So you
friendly
wanted
amendments,
to-
and most of them were just addressed.
9-foot tree wells is the only one you said.
Right, and then I got to the other ones of I started doing new roads, and they just addressed all of those. The 10 units was just addressed, or the 10 restricted affordable. Then I would personally like to see by the time they get to ARB that they design out those amenity spaces, and I don't know if there's an appetite for anybody.
I sort of feel about that it should be up to, if they are unit-specific or whatever, up to the person who's in the unit as to whether they want it for storage space or, a place to go with their computer and work away from people, or,
I think it's friendly.
all right, whatever. It is friendly. I think we're obsessed with it.
Control.
Yeah.
That's a shock. And then there was the no fence one you had in there too. So I think that's it. I mean,
Okay.
Cool.
I'm going to support the motion, but before we end this, and I'm sure other commissioners may want something to say about this. I think we have learned tonight about the shortcomings of the Bergamot plan in terms of Tier 1 and Tier 2. I mean, if we really want to encourage housing, having only a 0.2 difference in FAR between Tier 1 and Tier 2 is ridiculous. I also just am totally appalled by the 395 parking spaces on a project that's within walking distance of the Expo line. I mean, that's just unbelievable. And I know it's code, but I really think we need to look at that. And I don't know if we want to take away all minimums like we did downtown, or just reset the minimum so that it doesn't make us look like we have ignored the Expo line. And then the other thing is the bedroom mix. I mean, we would have had many more 2s and 3s if we had a workable Tier 2 project here, and more affordable units. So I think there's an awful lot to be done. I mean, this probably has citywide implications, but the Bergamot plan really should be high on the list in terms of looking at what's going on. And to the extent those impediments are affecting other city housing projects in progress, they need to be looked at as well. I also think that I'm not really even sure why Tier 1 comes to us. We really have very little latitude in terms of design and massing and all that. And this is something that we can talk with the council about in the future, and that is to look at increasing the number of projects that fall within administrative approval versus development review. I mean, this is, if we're looking at a way to expedite housing and make it happen and make it less expensive, we are going in the opposite direction. So I really think that at some point in the future, we need to look at broadening the administrative approval threshold. So that's what I have to say. Commissioner Landers.
What I'd like to add to that specifically is that we were told last week that the sites that we have on our current RENA cycle cannot be added to our next RENA cycle unless we make we credibly show that they are really developable for housing. And I want to thank Mr. Falonis. I mean, he shows us on page A05 where these potential future developable sites are. And we've been given a roadmap through this hearing to a very easy fix. If we we can look at these developable sites, we can go back to our FAR, we can go back to our, our incorporation of the state density bonus, as well as the state definition of a mixed-use project, and make the changes. They're right here in front of us. I came in very frustrated with this project. I share our chair's concerns about the amount of parking. Now I am, persuaded that this is pretty close to the best we would get under the policy that's been presented to us. So I feel obligated to support this. I think you've done a very good job within the envelope that is viable for a project. What is incredibly frustrating to me is that envelope is so restrictive at a time when we need real housing options to build livable, walkable, sustainable, transit-oriented communities. And this is close, but we could do so much better.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. And that is, I mean, the RENA numbers and what we are about is trying to balance the jobs housing ratio. And that's all fine and good. But if you aren't also addressing the traffic issue, it's kind of a moot point. And we are in this project, given the parking required is in no way addressing the traffic issue. In fact, it's probably exacerbating it. So we really need to look at that. Thank you. So are we ready to vote?
Can I just clarify on that fencing issue, because it was kind of just put out there as a comment. I just want to clarify that you mean like perimeter fencing, like on the property lines, right? Because it's like, we're not saying they can't have fences anywhere on the property. That may be kind of impractical on the interior.
There was some language
Yeah.
that I discussed with staff, which I thought was lovely.
Okay.
Hold on one second. I wrote it somewhere. The securing of premises shall not include the primary open space.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
So I think we're ready for a vote. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi?
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco?
Yes.
Commissioner Landris?
Yes, and this is just on the DR, correct?
This is just on
Right.
the DR, yeah.
Yes.
Commissioner Reese?
Yep.
And Chair Lambert?
Yes, and actually Commissioner Landers just brought up a point that maybe we want to come back with a clean STOA.
Yeah, I think.
And we can do that on December 18th, so we'll actually have 2 5-minute items on
Oh,
December
exciting.
18th.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so, talk about what?
No.
Yeah,
as
we have a quorum for December 18th.
Do we?
Yes, we do, because Commissioner Reese was going to check his calendar, since I haven't heard from him. I'm assuming it's okay.
On my calendar, I have Santa Monica Planning Commission.
Excellent. And I promise you it will be a very short meeting. The purpose of the meeting is to send on to City Council a red line R1 code amendment to accommodate only the 55% lot coverage for remodels. That's all it is. And then also the STOA for this project tonight.
Could we do that if we're doing a special, could we do it earlier? Could we do it at 6?
Sure.
No?
No, he has to.
Oh,
He has a
you
job.
can't till 6?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Because I can't make it if it's...
Yeah, he actually works.
Some people have jobs.
I'm not one of them, but we do this. I live on my
control of our schedule.
Okay, so December 18th. I'm assuming that Ross is busily working on the red line as we speak.
I'm
And
going to put
is that
it
it?
on my calendar.
Okay, then we are hereby adjourned.
Plus.